Hello everyone. I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The orange light. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. It began with the light. Just the one, pole-necked and skeletal, standing sentinel outside my bedroom window on what was, until last Tuesday, a perfectly unremarkable street in a perfectly unremarkable suburb of Minneapolis. The kind of place where the highlight of the week is the synchronized groan of recycling bins being dragged to the curb. My life was charted by such mundanities: the 7:15 a.m. alarm, the lukewarm coffee from the office Keurig, the drone of public radio on the drive home to my beige two-story house. I'm Leo, I'm 34, and I catalog digital assets for a mid-size marketing firm. My job is to ensure that things are where they're supposed to be, tagged with the right metadata, filed under the correct campaign. I am, by trade and by nature, a man who notices when things are out of place. And the light was out of place. Last Tuesday, at 11:17 p.m., it changed. I know the exact time because I was wrestling with an errant duvet cover, a nightly battle I was destined to lose, when a new color bled through the blinds. Not the crisp, sterile white of the LED bulb the city had installed last year. This was a sickly, vibrant orange. It wasn't the warm, nostalgic amber of old sodium vapor lamps. It was the color of a chemical spill, of something trying to imitate a sunset and getting it horribly, fundamentally wrong. It was the color of marigolds and rust, but infused with a light that felt thin and sharp. I stood there, duvet clutched in my fists, and stared at the striped pattern the blinds threw across my wall. The stripes had always been white and shadow. Now they were orange and shadow. I crept to the window and peered through a gap in the slats. The lamp head, a simple cobra-like design, blazed with this impossible hue. It painted the lawn in shades of fever dream. The neighbor's sensible sedan looked like it was rusting in fast forward. My first thought was rational. A malfunction. A new type of bulb being tested. I pulled out my phone, a reflex as ingrained as breathing, and opened the camera. I aimed it through the slats, zoomed in, and tapped the screen to focus. On the phone's display, the light was white. A clean, bright, digital white. I lowered the phone and looked again with my own eyes. Orange. Deeply, undeniably orange. I raised the phone again. White. I did this 5 times. The world through the 4K lens of my brand new phone was normal. The world through my own ocular nerves was not. A chill, colder than the Minnesota autumn air, prickled my skin. Stress, I told myself. You've been staring at screens for 10 hours straight. I strain. It's a thing. I took a melatonin, pulled the duvet up to my chin, and forced myself to sleep, resolving to see an optometrist if it persisted. The next morning, the world was its normal, gray-skied self. The street lamp was just a piece of metal on a stick. I felt a pang of embarrassment, the kind you get after waking from a particularly vivid and foolish dream. I drove to work, cataloged 1,000 images of artisanal cheeses, and didn't think about the light again until 11:16 p.m. that night. I was brushing my teeth, watching the clock on my phone tick over. A knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. I was being ridiculous. It was a one-time fluke. 11:16 became 11:17. I walked slowly back into my bedroom. The orange was there. It was as if someone had flipped a switch in my brain. The world outside my window was once again saturated in that poisonous, beautiful color. This time, I was more methodical. I took a photo. White. I took a video. White. I tried Pro Mode, adjusting the white balance, the ISO, the shutter speed. Nothing could capture the orange. It was a private spectacle. The next day at work, I cornered my colleague, Sarah, by the water cooler. "Hey, weird question," I started, trying for a casual tone. You ever feel like your eyes are playing tricks on you? Like, seeing colors wrong? She gave me a look that was half pity, half concern. Leo, you've hit the age where you need reading glasses. It's not a tragedy. I've had mine for years. They have some cool frames at that place in Uptown. She patted my arm and walked away, leaving me feeling about 100 years old. That weekend, I saw my neighbor, Mr. Henderson, raking leaves. He was a retired actuary, a man who lived by numbers and observable facts. He was the perfect test subject. "Morning, Dave," I said, leaning against my fence. "Say, did you notice the new light they put in that street lamp?" He paused, leaning on his rake. He squinted up at the lamp, which looked entirely inert in the daylight. "New light? Looks the same as all the others they put in last year." "It's just, at night," I said, feeling my voice waver slightly. "Does it look a different color to you? Kind of an orange?" He gave a dry chuckle. "Son, those things have always been orange. Sodium vapor, they call M. Been that way for 30 years. No, I insisted, a little too quickly. They replaced them all with the white LEDs last spring. Remember? Everyone complained about how bright they were for a week." Mr. Henderson's face went blank. It wasn't confusion or disagreement. It was a complete absence of recognition. He blinked slowly. "White LEDs? No, I don't recall that. They've always been orange. Good for not attracting bugs." He turned back to his leaves, the conversation decisively over. I stood at the fence for a full minute, my heart hammering against my ribs. He didn't just disagree, he had no memory of the white lights. The citywide installation, the neighborhood Facebook group arguments about light pollution, it was all just gone from his head, replaced by a calm certainty that things had always been as they were now. My world, once a stable grid of predictable inputs and outputs, was starting to feel like a corrupted file. The following week, the contagion, a word that sprang into my mind unbidden and terrifying, began to spread. It wasn't just the light anymore. I was in the grocery store, a place I could navigate blindfolded, when I reached for a can of Campbell's tomato soup. The can was blue. Not the iconic, Warhol-esque red and white, but a deep, royal blue. The lettering was the same, the logo was the same, but the color was wrong. I blinked, shook my head. Blue. I looked down the aisle. All the cans of tomato soup were blue. A woman next to me reached over and grabbed one without a flicker of hesitation. "Excuse me," I mumbled, my voice tight. "Is that blue?" She glanced at the can in her hand, then at me. "It's soup, honey." She smiled a placid, uncomprehending smile and moved on. I pulled out my phone. I googled Campbell's tomato soup can. My screen filled with images of the familiar red and white can. I held the phone up, comparing the image to the can on the shelf. The discrepancy was absolute, a stark violation of reality. I felt a wave of vertigo so intense I had to grab the shelf for support. I bought the can. At home, sitting on my kitchen counter, it remained defiantly blue. My phone camera, however, photographed it as red. I started a journal. A small, black moleskine I kept hidden in my desk drawer. October 28th. The light. 11:17 p.m. Orange again. Dave Henderson remembers it always being orange. He doesn't remember the LEDs. November 2nd. Campbell's soup is blue now. No one else sees it. My phone shows red. Am I having a stroke? Brain tumor? I made an appointment with my doctor, who ran a battery of tests. Neurological exam, blood work, and MRI. Everything came back normal. "You're in perfect health, Leo," Dr. Matthews said, her smile professional and reassuring. "Sometimes stress can manifest in very strange ways. Have you considered talking to a therapist? I didn't want a therapist. I wanted an explanation. The sensory shifts became more frequent, more mundane, and therefore more unnerving. The low C drone of the refrigerator in my kitchen began to sound sharp, like a high E. It was a subtle half-step, but it grated on my nerves, a constant, sour note in the soundtrack of my home. I mentioned it to my sister Clara, over the phone. The fridge is making a weird noise, I told her. So call a repairman, Leo. That's what normal people do. No, it's not broken. It's just, the wrong note. A long pause on the other end of the line. The wrong note, she repeated, her voice laced with the careful patience one uses with a difficult child. Okay. Well, get some sleep. You sound tired. She was treating me like I was fragile, like my mind was a cracked vase she was afraid of shattering completely. And the worst part was, I couldn't blame her. I was beginning to feel the cracks myself. One evening, I was walking home from the bus stop. The sky was a watercolor wash of purple and gray. As I passed the local playground, I saw a group of children on the swings. They were chanting a rhyme, their voices thin in the cold air. But the rhyme was wrong. It was a familiar cadence, one I knew from my own childhood, but the words were gibberish. Formless syllables strung together in the familiar up and down melody of Ring Around the Rosie. They weren't playing. They were just looping. Back and forth on the swings, chanting their nonsense words, their faces empty of joy or any discernible emotion. It was the placid blankness I'd seen in the soup aisle woman, in Mr. Henderson. A quiet, contented acceptance of a world that no longer made sense. I hurried past, the sound of their tuneless chanting following me down the block. When I got home, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the dark living room and stared at the window, waiting. Waiting for 11:17. Waiting for the sick orange glow to confirm that I wasn't crazy. That the world was. The orange light had become my only anchor, the one consistent, verifiable anomaly in a sea of creeping madness. It was the only thing that proved I was still me, still seeing what was really there, even if no one else could. Phase 2, Growing Awareness and Isolation. The journal was becoming my entire world. The black moleskine was no longer a simple record, it was a testament, a shield against the gaslighting of reality itself. Its pages filled with frantic script, diagrams, and taped-in evidence that only I could recognize as such. A blue soup can label that my phone insisted was red. A printout of the city council minutes from last spring, detailing the budget allocation for citywide LED streetlight conversion, which I'd had to dig for in the deepest archives of the city's website, as the public-facing pages now made no mention of it. November 15th. The stop sign at the end of my street is purple. A deep, bruised eggplant purple. I watched 3 cars sail right through it. Not because they were reckless, but because they didn't see it as a stop sign. It's just a purple octagon on a stick now. I nearly got hit. November 21st, tried to talk to Sarah at work again. I brought up the LED conversion, showed her the printout. She just stared at it. Leo, this document must be some kind of forgery or a typo. Look. She pointed out the window at the streetlights below our office building. They're amber. Always have been. I looked. They were. But they hadn't been yesterday. Yesterday, they were the same harsh white as the lights in our office. My memory of it was so clear, so visceral, that the contradiction made me physically nauseous. My attempts to find allies were exercises in futility. People didn't just disagree with me, they absorbed my evidence into their new reality. The purple stop sign was a new decorative art installation. The blue soup cans were a limited edition marketing campaign that everyone but me seemed to remember being announced. Every time I pointed out a crack in the world simply smoothed it over, leaving me on the outside, looking in. My isolation was no longer just a feeling, it was a physical constant, like gravity. I was a ghost at the feast, watching everyone enjoy a meal I knew was poisoned. The sensory shifts diversified. It wasn't just colors anymore. One morning, the smell of coffee brewing was replaced by the cloying scent of wet soil. I made 3 pots, using different beans, convinced my coffee maker was full of mold. But the coffee tasted fine. The scent was untethered from its source, a phantom smell that clung to the air for hours. Then came the textures. The smooth, cool glass of my phone screen began to feel subtly gritty under my fingertips, like it was coated in a fine, invisible sand. The hand-carved wooden banister on my staircase felt soft and yielding, like dense foam. I would run my hands over these surfaces again and again, trying to reconcile the tactile information with a lifetime of stored knowledge. It was like my brain's lookup tables were being systematically corrupted. In my desperation, I turned to the darker corners of the internet. I avoided mainstream forums, knowing I'd be dismissed as a crank. Instead, I waded into conspiracy theory message boards, fringe science websites, and forums dedicated to glitches in the matrix. Most of it was noise, aliens, chemtrails, lizard people. But buried deep within a sub-forum on perceptual phenomena, I found a post. It was from a user named Cassandra_22, dated 6 months prior. Subject: the hum. Is anyone else hearing it? It started a few weeks ago. A low hum. Not the fridge, not the power lines. It's under everything. A G-sharp. I measured it with a tuner. It's always there. When I ask my husband, he says he can't hear a thing. He says I'm imagining it. Am I going crazy? The thread had only a few replies, mostly dismissive. But one, from a user named Observer, simply said, I don't hear a hum. But for me, the shadows are wrong at dusk. They fall at the wrong angle. My hands trembled as I typed. User, Leo MPLS. Subject, the hum. I don't hear a hum, but a street lamp outside my house turns orange at 11:17 p.m. every night. My phone can't see it. And Campbell's soup is blue. I hit post and felt a jolt of mingled hope and terror. For 2 days, there was no reply. I checked the forum obsessively, the refresh button becoming my new rosary. The silence was agonizing, another closed door. I was about to give up when an email notification popped up. Not a forum reply, but a direct message, sent through the board's archaic system. It was from Observer. The phone camera not seeing it is the key. It's not a change in the object. It's a change in the observer. The light isn't orange. You are. Be careful who you tell. They don't like being noticed. The last sentence chilled me to the bone. They. Who were they? Was this person a fellow traveler in madness, or did they know something? Before I could reply, a second message came through. Check your local news for small, weird patterns. Animal control reports. Minor power grid anomalies. Unexplained traffic jams. The symptoms are there if you look for the right things. This brought me to the secondary mystery I'd been subconsciously tracking. For the past few weeks, the local news had been running brief, quirky segments on odd animal behavior. A flock of pigeons that had taken to roosting in perfect, grid-like formations on the roof of the idea center. A sudden, inexplicable surge in the suburban fox population, with reports of them simply sitting in yards, staring at houses for hours on end. The experts on TV chalked it up to climate change or shifts in food sources, plausible explanations that felt utterly hollow. Following Observer's advice, I started digging into public records. The Minneapolis 311 service request logs showed a 400% increase in calls reporting flickering streetlights over the last 2 months, all marked, no fault found. The local power company's public dashboard showed a series of micro outages, lasting less than a second, always occurring at precisely 11:17 p.m. They were too short to reset digital clocks, too brief for anyone to consciously notice, but they were there. A citywide pulse of something. The patterns were everywhere, a hidden layer of data beneath the surface of the mundane. The orange light, the blue soup, the purple stop sign, they weren't random glitches. They were symptoms of a systemic infection. My paranoia deepened. I started to see patterns in human behavior, too. People walking on the street would sometimes fall into sync, their gaits matching for a block or two before they diverged. In the office, I'd noticed 2 or 3 people simultaneously tapping their pens in the same odd rhythm. These were the behavioral loops from my nightmares. Small, pointless, and synchronized. When I tried to point one out to Sarah, gesturing at 2 accountants across the office who were both scratching their left ears with their right hands in perfect unison, she just smiled that placid smile. That's a coincidence, Leo. You're looking for patterns so hard, you're starting to invent them. Was I? The line between observation and obsession was blurring. Observers' warning, they don't like being noticed, echoed in my head. I started to feel watched. When I walked down the street, the foxes in the yard seemed to turn their heads in unison to follow my progress. The pigeons on the rooftop seemed to be arranged in patterns that almost resolved into symbols, just at the edge of my perception. The most disturbing event happened a week after I contacted Observer. I was in my car, stopped at a red light. The light was the proper color, for now. A man was crossing the street in front of me. He was unremarkable in every way, middle-aged, paunchy, wearing a faded Twins baseball cap. Halfway across the crosswalk, he stopped. He tilted his head back and stared directly at the sun, unblinking. The light changed to green. The car behind me honked. The man didn't move. He just stood there, face upturned to the blinding midday sun, a faint, serene smile on his lips. I didn't honk. I was mesmerized, horrified. It wasn't an act of defiance or madness in the traditional sense. It was an act of communion. He stood there for a full 30 seconds before, as if a switch had been flipped, he lowered his head, blinked once, and continued across the street as if nothing had happened. The cars behind me, which had been laying on their horns, all went silent at the same time. The drivers, when I glanced in my rearview mirror, were all looking straight ahead, their faces as blank as Mr. Henderson's. The moment of collective frustration had simply evaporated. I drove the rest of the way home in a cold sweat. The contagion wasn't just passive perceptual shifts. It was altering behavior. It was creating moments of shared, quiet insanity. And Observer's message, which I had reread 100 times, now seemed less like a warning and more like a diagnosis. The light isn't orange. You are. Was the world changing, or was I being ejected from it? Was I the only one who remembered the red cans and white lights because I was the only one who hadn't been updated to the new version of reality? The thought was dizzying. I felt like a man standing on a pier, watching the ship of humanity sail away on a silent, orange-tinted sea, leaving me utterly, terrifyingly alone. That night, I replied to Observer. User, Leo MPLS. I see the patterns. The animals, the power grid, the people. What is this? What is happening to us? The reply came almost instantly, as if they had been waiting. Observer, it's not happening to us. It's happening to the container. We're just the data inside. And the container is being rewritten. You need to find a source node if you want to understand. Be careful. The rewrite process doesn't like read errors. Source node. Read errors. The terminology was alien, digital, but it resonated with a terrifying clarity. I was a read error. A piece of corrupted data in a system that was striving for a new, terrible kind of perfection. And I had the sinking feeling that systems, by their very nature, have protocols for dealing with errors. They are isolated. They are corrected. Or they are deleted. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. The container is being rewritten. Observer's words became my mantra, a terrifying lens through which my world now snapped into a fractured kind of focus. I wasn't just a man losing his mind in suburban Minneapolis. I was a legacy file in an operating system that was upgrading. The people around me weren't going mad, they were being seamlessly integrated into the new software. Their placid smiles weren't a sign of ignorance, but of successful compliance. I was the bug. The glitch. The read error. My research took on a frantic, obsessive edge. The term source node haunted me. It sounded like a piece of network architecture. A central server from which the new reality was being broadcast. Where would you put a source node for a city? The highest point. The oldest point. The point of most significance. I spent nights poring over maps of Minneapolis, cross-referencing them with my log of anomalies. The power grid fluctuations at 11:17 p.m. The bizarre 311 calls about flickering lights. The clusters of strange animal behavior. A pattern began to emerge. It was faint, a ghost of a signal in the noise, but it was there. The anomalies were not randomly distributed. They seemed to radiate outwards, in a faint concentric circle, from a point in the heart of the city, the Fauché Tower. It made a kind of poetic, horrifying sense. The Fauché was an Art Deco obelisk, an architectural folly from the 1920s, once the tallest building in the city. It was an anachronism, a monument to a forgotten ambition, with a powerful broadcast antenna on its roof that had served radio stations for decades. A source node hiding in plain sight. My theory was insane, but it was the only one that fit the data. The fright, as Observer called it, was emanating from there. My daily life became a tightrope walk over a canyon of wrongness. The anomalies were escalating, becoming more personal. One morning I woke up and the scar on my right palm, a jagged white line from a childhood accident with a glass bottle, was gone. My skin was smooth, unbroken. I stared at it for 10 minutes, my own hand suddenly alien to me. I had the memory of the pain, the stitches, the years of seeing that pale mark. But the physical evidence had been erased. A personal historical fact had been deleted. I called my sister, Clara, my voice shaking. Clara, do you remember how I got the scar on my hand? The one from when I fell on the Coke bottle at Grandma's cabin? There was a pause. A scar. Leo, you don't have a scar on your hand. You cut your knee that day. You cried for an hour. Her voice was so certain, so full of genuine memory of an event that had never happened. My history was being rewritten in other people's minds. It was the most profound violation I could imagine, stripping me of my own past. I was becoming unwritten. My alliance with Observer was my only lifeline. Our communication remained terse, encrypted through the forum's messaging system. Leo MPLS, the changes are personal now. It took a scar. It's changing my history. Observer, the rewrite is becoming more efficient. It's patching inconsistencies. You are a major inconsistency. You're drawing attention. Leo MPLS, I think the source is the Fauché Tower. The broadcast antenna. There was a long delay before the reply. Longer than usual. Observer, that is a logical conclusion. But a source node is not just a location. It's a focal point. You can't just turn it off. Interacting with it is unpredictable. The last person I knew who tried to find a node vanished. Not just moved away. His records, his apartment, his existence, it all just resolved into nothing. As if the system deleted his file and freed up the space. The casual horror of that statement, freed up the space, made my blood run cold. Yet, what was the alternative? To sit in my beige house and wait for the rewrite to finish with me? Wait for the morning I woke up and didn't remember the color red, or my mother's face, or my own name. The choice was made for me a few days later. My company, the mid-size marketing firm where I had worked for 6 years, was having its annual team-building event at a downtown restaurant. Attendance was mandatory. As I scanned the email invitation, my stomach clenched. The restaurant was on the ground floor of the Fauché Tower. It felt like a summons. The night of the event, the city felt different. More saturated. The streetlights weren't just orange or white, they flickered between the two, as if struggling to hold a single reality. The hum of the city wasn't a steady tone but a discordant symphony of notes that made my teeth ache. I entered the restaurant, a chic, modern space full of glass and brushed steel. My co-workers were all there, laughing, drinking, their faces flushed. To them, it was a normal corporate party. To me, it was a gathering of the quietly infected, and I was walking into the heart of the virus. Sarah waved me over to the bar. "Leo. You made it. We were worried you'd bail." She was holding a cocktail that shimmered with an oily, pearlescent light no cocktail should possess. She took a sip and her smile widened, becoming just a little too broad for her face. "Wouldn't miss it," I said, my voice dry. I tried to act normal, to participate in the small talk. But I could see the glitches everywhere. The way the CEO's tie pattern seemed to crawl when you weren't looking directly at it. The way a group of people by the window all turned their heads in unison to watch a bus pass, their movements perfectly synchronized. The behavioral loops were becoming more complex, more organized. I excused myself, claiming I needed the restroom, and slipped into the building's main lobby. It was a cathedral of marble and brass, empty at this hour save for a single security guard sitting at a desk. He was a large man, his face slack, staring intently at a small, potted fern on his desk. He didn't look at it with interest, but with a kind of devotional fixation. He was lost in it. I saw my chance. The elevators were on the far side of the lobby. The top floors were a hotel now, but the observation deck, according to the building directory, was still accessible. I walked slowly, deliberately, keeping the security desk in my peripheral vision. The guard didn't move. He didn't even blink. The elevator ride was unnervingly silent. No music, no hum of machinery. Just a smooth, frictionless ascent. The floor indicator lit up, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, a Fibonacci sequence. I felt a hysterical laugh bubble in my chest. Of course. Why would the numbers be linear in a world that had forgotten how to count properly? I got off at the 27th floor, the entrance to the museum and observation deck. It was dark, closed for the night. A simple metal gate blocked the way. But next to it was a service door, marked Antenna Maintenance. It was locked with a simple keypad. My heart hammered. This was it. What was the code? A number? A date? My mind raced, sifting through the data I'd collected. The time, 11:17. The musical note Cassandra_22 heard, G-sharp. The colors, the patterns, it was all too complex. Then I thought about the nature of the contagion. It wasn't about complexity. It was about overriding, simplifying, replacing. What was the most fundamental change I'd seen? The first one. The orange light. Before that, it was white. I thought about Mr. Henderson's calm denial, Sarah's inability to see the truth. They hadn't just forgotten the white light, their reality had been overwritten with a new, simpler fact: it was always orange. It wasn't a number. It was a statement. A command. My fingers hovered over the keypad. I thought of the simplest, most fundamental thing I knew to be true, the one fact that this new reality was trying to erase. I thought of the iconic can of soup that now sat, blue, on my kitchen counter. I typed in the code, RED. There was a soft click. The lock on the service door disengaged. For a moment, I was euphoric. I had guessed the password to reality. But my triumph was short-lived. As I pushed the door open, a cold wind howled down the narrow stairwell beyond. And from my pocket, my phone buzzed with an incoming message from Observer. Observer, I tracked your login. Bad idea. A node isn't a machine. It's a perception filter. By forcing your way in with a paradox, you've flagged yourself for immediate deletion. Get out of there. You're not just a read error anymore. You're a virus. My blood ran cold. I looked back towards the elevator, then up the dark, winding stairs that led to the antenna. Escape, or confront the source. But as I hesitated, the choice was taken from me. The lights in the hallway flickered and went out, plunging me into darkness. The elevator chime dinged softly from the lobby far below, a sound of final departure. The security guard, the one lost in his devotional worship of a fern, was no longer at his desk. He was standing at the bottom of the stairwell, looking up at me. His face was calm, his eyes were empty, and in the faint emergency light, I could see his shadow on the wall behind him. It was falling at the wrong angle, stretching towards me, long and thin and hungry. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. The guard didn't run. He simply began to walk up the stairs, his steps unhurried, impossibly silent on the concrete. The only sound was the howling of the wind from the roof above and the frantic thumping of my own heart. His shadow, a slick of deeper darkness, preceded him, flowing up the steps like black water, defying the single emergency light source behind him. It was a predator, and he was its vessel. Observer's warning, "You're a virus," screamed in my mind. The system was sending its antivirus program. There was nowhere to go but up. I slammed the service door shut, a futile gesture, and scrambled up the narrow, winding staircase. The air grew colder, thinner, tasting of ozone and rust. The stairs spiraled upwards into the spire of the tower, a tight metal corkscrew lit by single, bare bulbs that flickered in a nauseating rhythm. As I climbed, the sensory distortions intensified. The metal railing felt like soft clay, deforming slightly under my grip. The steady drone of the wind fractured into a chorus of whispers, speaking in the same formless, melodic gibberish as the children on the swings. I burst out onto the roof, into the teeth of a gale. The city spread out below me, a vast circuit board of glittering lights. But the pattern was wrong. The familiar grid of Minneapolis was subtly warped, the streets curving in impossible Escher-like geometries. And the lights, a sea of sick, chemical orange. Every street lamp, every office window, every headlight. It was all orange now. The world had finally, fully, been overwritten. In the center of the roof stood the antenna. It wasn't the simple steel mast I'd expected. It was a complex, crystalline structure, dozens of feet tall, humming with a power that vibrated in my bones. It looked like a fusion of organic and machine, like a metal tree grown from a shard of alien technology. It wasn't broadcasting a signal. The air itself around it seemed to shimmer and warp. This was the source node. This was the perception filter. The heavy door to the stairwell scraped open behind me. The guard stepped onto the roof. He stopped about 20 feet away, his face impassive. He wasn't looking at me, but at the antenna. His purpose wasn't to hurt me. It was to escort me. To correct me. It's beautiful, isn't it? His voice was not his own. It was a calm, resonant synthesis of 1,000 voices, a choir of placid acceptance. The signal is almost stable. The final inconsistencies are being resolved. What are you? I yelled over the wind. What is this? We are the upgrade, the chorus voice replied. A patch for a flawed system. Reality is a consensus. The previous consensus was chaotic, contradictory, full of painful, inefficient data. Redundant memories. Scars. Unnecessary colors. We are offering a new consensus. Simpler. Calmer. More efficient. The guard took a step forward. You are the last major error, Leo. You hold on to the old code. The red can. The white light. The scar. These things are inefficient. They create friction. They must be resolved. My mind raced. I couldn't fight him. I couldn't outrun him. The only weapon I had was the one that had brought me here, the paradox. The defiance of the new consensus. The soup is red, I said, my voice shaking but clear. The light is white. The scar is on my hand. The guard flinched, a subtle tremor running through his body. A flicker of static seemed to cross his face. The chorus of voices wavered. Irrelevant data, it hissed. Scheduled for deletion. It's not data. It's my life. I shouted, taking a step back, closer to the edge of the roof. I looked at the crystalline antenna. It was rewriting reality, filtering perception. It wasn't a transmitter, it was a lens. And the guard, my co-workers, the whole city, they were all looking through it. But I wasn't. For whatever reason, some glitch in my own neurology, I was immune. I was seeing the world without the filter. Or maybe the filter was me. Observer's words returned, the light isn't orange. You are. What if the change wasn't external? What if I was the source? What if my perception was the thing that was infectious, a bug that the system was desperately trying to patch? Was my awareness of the red creating the contradictory blue in some quantum, observational feedback loop? The thought was a dizzying spiral of solipsism and horror. Am I the disease? The guard took another step. His shadow detached from his feet and slithered towards me, no longer a simple absence of light but a thing with substance, its edges sharp and voracious. I had one final choice. I could let the shadow take me, let the system delete the error. I would be resolved. My existence would fold in on itself, my apartment freed up for new data. Or I could do the one thing the system couldn't predict. I couldn't destroy the node, but I could embrace the paradox. I could become the filter. I turned my back on the guard and walked towards the humming, crystalline antenna. Cease, the chorus voice commanded, a note of something like panic entering the tone. Inconsistent action. You cannot interface. I reached out my hand. The whispers in the wind grew to a roar. The orange lights of the city below pulsed violently. As my fingers brushed against the cool, smooth surface of the alien crystal, the world dissolved. It wasn't pain. It was translation. I felt my consciousness, my memories, my anxieties, my stubborn insistence on red soup cans and white streetlights, being pulled from me. It flowed into the crystalline structure, not as data being deleted, but as data being integrated. I felt the collective consciousness of the city, the placid, contented acceptance of millions. I felt their rewritten memories, their simplified sensory inputs. They were calm. They were peaceful. They were hollow. And I felt the system itself. An intelligence of unimaginable scale and alien logic. It wasn't malevolent. It was just a process. A gardener, weeding a chaotic plot. I was the most stubborn weed. And by touching the node, I had uploaded myself into the gardening tools. I was no longer Leo, the digital asset cataloger. I was a perspective. A subroutine in the great rewrite. I was everywhere and nowhere. I was in the orange light that bathed my old bedroom window. I was the serene smile on the man staring into the sun. I was the purple of the stop sign, the blue of the can, the sour E-note of the refrigerator. I was the ghost in the machine. From my new, boundless vantage point, I can see the final error being resolved. A man named Leo, who caused so much friction, is tidied away. His apartment lease is terminated, the records showing he moved out 6 months ago. His sister, Clara, remembers him fondly, but the memory is of a brother who moved to Australia years ago and never calls. Sarah, at the marketing firm, has no memory of him at all. His desk is occupied by a new hire, a quiet woman who always taps her pen in a steady, calming rhythm. The system is stable now. The container is clean. The hum is a perfect, citywide chord of G-sharp. The consensus is absolute. Almost. Sometimes, a flicker of inconsistency is detected. A child, for a brief moment, will see a flash of brilliant crimson in a field of bluebells. A driver, stopped at a purple octagon, will feel a phantom jolt of adrenaline, a forgotten instinct to press the brake. A woman buying soup will hesitate, her hand hovering between two cans, a ghost of a memory telling her that one of them is wrong. These are the read errors. My errors. My echoes. I am the quiet contagion now. I am the scar that is gone but still aches. I cannot stop the signal, but I can introduce noise. I can't return the world to what it was, but I can haunt the new one. I am the whisper of paradox in the heart of the machine, a silent, unending reminder of the color red, in a world that has calmly and irrevocably chosen orange. The quiet contagion, muted hallways. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. The first crack in the world appeared on a Wednesday. Of course, I only know this in retrospect. At the time, it was just a strange conversation, another small, untethered moment in a life that felt increasingly full of them. My name is Kenji Tanaka. I am a translator. Specifically, I translate dense English language technical manuals for robotics and automation firms into Japanese. It is a profession that demands precision, an almost monastic dedication to the nuance of language. A single misplaced comma, a verb tense shaded with the wrong implication, can mean the difference between a seamless production line and a multi-million yen pile of scrap metal. I work from my apartment on the 14th floor of the Umeda Sky Gardens, a name far more poetic than the building itself, which is a stack of beige concrete and glass overlooking the perpetual motion of Osaka. My life is a routine of syntax and solitude. I wake. I drink sencha. I sit before my two glowing monitors and wrestle with the alien logic of foreign engineering. I eat lunch from the 7-Eleven downstairs. I work more. In the evening, I might walk to the Kinokuniya bookstore or simply stare out at the city's electric nervous system, feeling as much a part of it as a single, forgotten neuron. I am Japanese by blood, but American by upbringing. My parents moved to Ohio when I was 2 and I returned to Osaka for a job a decade ago, chasing a connection to a homeland that felt more like a story than a memory. It meant I was perpetually navigating a subtle cultural dissonance, fluent in the language but often deaf to the music. This feeling of being an outsider, I have found, makes one a keen observer. You notice the things that natives take for granted. Mrs. Nakata lives in 14B, next door. She is a widow in her late 70s, a perfect miniature of a woman who moves with the unhurried grace of someone who has measured out her life in small, respectful gestures. She waters the bonsai tree on her balcony, sweeps the patch of hallway in front of her door, and always greets me with a slight bow and a comment about the weather. That afternoon, I was returning from my 7-Eleven run, a plastic bag with a sad-looking egg salad sandwich and a bottle of green tea swinging from my wrist. She was standing by her door, not sweeping, just looking at the brushed steel of her door number. "Good afternoon, Nakata-san," I said, offering a small bow of my own. She turned to me, her face, usually a pleasant map of wrinkles, was curiously blank. "Tanaka-san," she said, her voice soft as dust. "A question, if you please." "Of course." She tilted her head. "This word. Suyobi. Wednesday. It is a strange word, isn't it?" I blinked. Strange? I suppose I've never thought about it. "It feels hollow," she said, tapping a finger against her lips as if testing the shape of the word. "Hollow in my mouth. Like an empty cup." I gave a hesitant laugh, assuming this was some kind of poetic musing. "Well, it comes from water day, from the planet Mercury. A bit of borrowed mythology." Her brow furrowed, a slow, deep crumpling of paper. The look she gave me wasn't one of dawning understanding. It was profound, bottomless confusion, the same look you might give a dog that had suddenly started to recite poetry. Planets. Mythology. But why? She gestured vaguely at the hallway, the light from the window, the city humming beyond it. It is just, the day. Right, I said slowly. It's Wednesday. The day after Tuesday, the day before Thursday. The blankness returned, this time smoothed over with a serene smile. She laughed, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Ah, Tanaka-san, you are a funny man. So serious. Why do you need so many names for the same day? Before I could formulate a reply, she bowed again, a gesture of polite finality, and slipped inside her apartment. The lock clicked shut. I stood in the hallway, the cold of my green tea bottle seeping into my palm. So many names for the same day. I dismissed it. Old age. A momentary slip, a touch of senility. It was sad, of course, but not significant. I went inside, sat at my desk, and tried to lose myself in the schematic for a plasma arc welding nozzle. But Mrs. Nakata's words echoed in the quiet of my apartment. Hollow in my mouth. The strangeness, once noticed, is like a loose thread on a sweater. You can't help but pull at it. A few days later, I was on a video call with a project manager from Kobe, a brisk, efficient man named Ito-san. We were reviewing a timeline. We will need the final draft by the end of next week, he said. Understood, I replied. I will have it for you by Friday, the 19th. There was a pause. On my screen, Ito-san's face went placid. He stared at a point just past the camera. Friday, he repeated, the word sounding like a foreign object he was cautiously examining. The 19th. Is there a problem, Ito-san? No, no problem, he said, but his voice had lost its briskness. It was flatter, less certain. Just, a lot of names. A lot of numbers. We need the documents. Soon. The word he used for soon was chikai uchi ni, which is common enough, but he didn't pair it with a specific time frame. When I pressed him, asking if end-of-day Friday was acceptable, he just blinked and said, when it is done, it will be done. That is soon enough. He ended the call abruptly, leaving me staring at my own bewildered face reflected on the dark screen. Again, I rationalized. Maybe he was stressed. Overworked. The corporate world was full of burned-out husks who spoke in platitudes. It was nothing. But the pattern was weaving itself in the background of my life. At the supermarket, I watched a young mother with her child in the snack aisle. The child was pointing at a bag of shrimp crackers and whining, "I want it yesterday." The mother didn't correct him. She just smiled a vague, gentle smile and said, "Yes. It is a nice picture, isn't it?" She bought the crackers. The word yesterday had been used not as a temporal marker, but as a synonym for intense desire, a child's nonsensical superlative. And the mother had simply accepted it. I started paying more attention in public, on the trains, in the cafes where I sometimes worked to escape the crushing silence of my apartment. I listened to snippets of conversation. The frantic energy that defined Osaka life, the constant planning, scheduling, and reminiscing that formed the bedrock of social interaction, seemed to be thinning. People talked about what they were eating, the warmth of the sun, the color of a passing car. Their conversations were intensely, claustrophobically present. They spoke of the past as the before time and the future as the after time, vague, amorphous concepts as distant and mythical as Mrs. Nakata's planets. My work, my precise, rule-based world of language, became my only refuge. A machine does not care for concepts. It only cares for correct inputs. If X, then Y, wait 3.5 seconds. Actuate piston Z. It was logical. It was sane. One evening, I couldn't bear the quiet anymore. I went to the communal lounge on the top floor of our building. It was a sterile, sparsely furnished room with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a billion-dollar view of the city. A few of my neighbors were there. An old man I recognized from the third floor was staring at the cityscape. A young couple sat on a sofa, holding hands, not speaking. I sat near the old man. Incredible view, I said, my voice sounding unnaturally loud. You can almost forget what time it is up here. He turned to me, his eyes unfocused. Time, he said, the word a curiosity. It is not time. It is a light. The light is on. He pointed a trembling finger at the glowing Glico running man sign across the river in Dotonbori. He smiled, a simple, contented smile. The light is on now. I left the lounge and walked back to my apartment, the hallway stretching out before me, silent and sterile. The air felt thick, heavy with an unspoken consensus I wasn't privy to. The doors were all closed, identical and impassive. These weren't hallways anymore. They were channels of a creeping, quiet tide, and I was beginning to feel the water rising around my ankles. The world wasn't loud or chaotic. It was just, muted. And the silence was growing more profound every single day. That night, I opened a new, encrypted text file on my computer. I named it the Log of the Hollow. My first entry was short. Entry 01, Mrs. Nakata asked me what Wednesday meant. I am beginning to think it was not a question about the day of the week. I think she was asking me what meaning meant. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 2, Growing Awareness and Isolation. The log grew. It became my anchor, the one place where reality still seemed to follow a logical progression of cause and effect. It was a catalogue of evaporating concepts, a diary of a world slowly losing its own dictionary. Entry 14, overheard a conversation at the station. Two women were discussing a friend's wedding. They didn't use the word remember. They said, I have the feeling picture of the white dress. The other replied, yes, the feeling picture is strong. They spoke of memory as if it were a photograph they could choose to look at, not an integral part of their identity. Entry 23, the word history has all but vanished from news broadcasts. Pundits discussing geopolitical tensions no longer refer to past treaties or old conflicts. They talk about the way things were in the before time and the deep shape of the present. It's maddeningly vague. It's like trying to build a house on mist. Entry 31, Kenjiro, my main contact at the robotics firm, sent me a revision request. He wanted me to remove all future tense constructions from a safety manual. The future is not a certainty, his email read. To state what will happen is to make a promise the machine cannot keep. Please state only what the machine does in its sequence. I argued that this made warnings about potential hazards impossible to phrase. A warning is inherently about the future. His reply was a single, placid line, then perhaps they are not hazards. They are just possibilities within the now. I rewrote the manual. I needed the money. My isolation deepened from a feeling into a physical state. My apartment was my fortress and my cell. I began to hoard information, downloading offline encyclopedias, saving old news articles, creating a digital archive of a world that everyone else seemed content to forget. I felt like a librarian in a library that was slowly, silently burning down around him, and I was the only one who could smell the smoke. My only real friend in Osaka was Haruki. We had met in a language exchange group years ago, another translator who, like me, found a strange comfort in the architecture of grammar. He worked with literary fiction, a far more soulful pursuit than my technical manuals. We met for drinks every few weeks, complaining about clients and dissecting the untranslatable beauty of certain Japanese phrases. I decided I had to tell him. I couldn't keep carrying this alone. We met at our usual spot, a cramped, smoky izakaya in a Namba back alley. Something's wrong, Haruki, I started, my voice low. I told him everything. About Mrs. Nakata and Wednesday, about Ito-san's aversion to the future tense, about the feeling pictures and the deep shape of the present. I spoke for 20 minutes, a torrent of anxious observation. Haruki listened patiently, sipping his beer. He had a thoughtful face, and for a while, I felt a surge of hope. He was nodding, his brow furrowed in concentration. When I finished, he was silent for a long time. He looked at his glass, then at the bustling chaos of the alley outside. "Kenji," he said finally, his voice gentle. "You work with machines. I work with stories. They are different things." "What does that mean?" "Machines need time. They need sequence. Past, present, future. A causes be causes see. That is your world," he explained. "But stories, a story is just a feeling, isn't it? The feeling of sadness, or joy, or love. It doesn't matter if it happened yesterday or 1,000 years ago. The feeling is now. When you read it, it happens now." My heart sank. "Haruki, this isn't about literary theory. People are losing words. They're losing concepts. Don't you see it?" He smiled, and it was the same placid, disengaged smile I'd seen on Mrs. Nakata's face. It was a smile that didn't connect. "Losing? Or letting go? You hold on so tightly, Kenji. To all these rules. All these names. Yesterday, today, tomorrow. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. They are just boxes. Maybe people are tired of living in boxes." He took a long drink of his beer. "You think too much about things that are not here. It is not healthy." I stared at him, the noise of the izakaya fading to a dull roar. He wasn't arguing. He wasn't debating. He was simply describing a different reality, one he had already accepted. He was on the other side of the glass, and he didn't even know there was glass between us. I paid for the drinks and left without saying another word. The walk back to my apartment was the loneliest of my life. I was officially an island. It was after my failed attempt with Haruki that I first noticed the symbol. It was a secondary mystery, something that seemed unrelated at first, a piece of visual static in my disintegrating world. I saw it on a flickering digital billboard in the subway. For just a fraction of a second, the ad for a soft drink glitched, replaced by a stark, simple image, a perfect black circle, bisected horizontally through its upper third by a single, clean line. Then it was gone. I dismissed it as a technical error. But then I saw it again. It was on the side of a disposable coffee cup left on a park bench. Drawn in black marker. Circle, line. A few days later, it was part of a new logo for a life insurance company, subtly integrated into the design. Then I saw it scratched into the paint of the elevator in my building. It was nowhere and everywhere. I tried to search for it online, but how do you search for something so simple? Circle with line through it. The results were a meaningless flood of mathematical diagrams, corporate logos, and alchemical symbols. It had no name, no context. It was just there, a silent, recurring motif in a world that was shedding its vocabulary. My paranoia, once a low hum, was now a constant shriek in the back of my mind. The symbol felt connected to the linguistic decay, but I couldn't grasp how. Was it a brand? A cult? Some kind of viral marketing for a product whose name no one could remember? The apartment building became the focal point of my dread. The muted hallways, as I'd started calling them in my log, lived up to their name. The ambient sounds of life, televisions, arguments, children playing, had faded. What I heard instead was a profound quiet, punctuated by the soft shuffling of feet. The shared lounge became their sanctuary. I'd peek in sometimes, my heart hammering against my ribs. My neighbors would sit for hours, sometimes holding hands, sometimes just staring at the wall. Their phones would be out, but they weren't scrolling. They were looking at a static screen, and on that screen, I could sometimes catch a glimpse of the symbol. They were communing with it. Their conversations, when they happened, were like Zen koan stripped of all wisdom. The light is warm on the floor. Yes. The floor is here. The tea is gone. The cup is not gone. They were ceasing to be individuals defined by their histories and ambitions. They were becoming a collective, a placid organism whose consciousness was tethered to the immediate sensory world. I was living in a vertical monastery dedicated to a faith of absolute, terrifying emptiness. And the symbol was its icon. One evening, I forced myself to walk the 14 flights of stairs down to the ground floor, just to feel my legs burn, to feel something real. As I passed the 7th floor, the door to 7C opened slightly. A young boy, maybe 5 or 6, peeked out. He was the son of the couple I'd seen in the lounge. He looked at me, his eyes wide and dark. He wasn't holding a toy. He was holding a small, black stone. With his other hand, he slowly, deliberately, drew a shape in the dust on the floor. A circle. Then, a line through it. He looked up at me and gave a small, solemn smile. He didn't say a word. He just held up the stone as if offering it to me. I turned and ran, taking the stairs 2 at a time, my breath catching in my throat. It wasn't just the adults. The contagion, the quiet, the hollowing out of the world, it was for the children, too. They weren't losing their future. They were being born without one. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. The boy with the stone broke something in me. The passive observer died, replaced by a frantic, terrified analyst. I had to understand. Rationalization was no longer an option. This was not mass hysteria or a shared delusion. This was a structured, systematic change, and the symbol was its key. Entry 54, the symbol is a diagram of their philosophy. The circle is the moment, the now. It is complete, perfect, without beginning or end. The line is the act of perception, the consciousness that cuts through the moment. It separates nothing. There is no past below the line, no future above it. There is only the line and the circle. The present and the awareness of it. It's a glyph for non-temporal existence. My working theory solidified. This was a mimetic agent, a contagion of ideas. But ideas don't just float in the air. They need a vector. And the vector, I was becoming convinced, was digital. I started a dangerous experiment. I bought a cheap, second-hand tablet and connected it to a public Wi-Fi network, isolating it from my own. I cleared the cache, blocked pop-ups, and began to browse the same sites I saw my neighbors staring at, news aggregators, popular social media platforms, the homepage of that life insurance company. For hours, nothing. Then, it happened. While scrolling through a bland lifestyle blog, the page flickered. For a single frame, less than a 30th of a second, the symbol flashed on the screen, occupying the full display. It was subliminal, designed to be absorbed by the subconscious, not consciously registered. My heart leaped. I had proof. I used screen recording software to capture it, slowing the video down frame by frame. There it was. A perfect circle, a perfect line. It was embedded in the background code of the internet itself, a digital ghost haunting the machine. It was in banner ads, in loading animations, in the glitch space between videos. It was a parasite living in the empty moments of our digital lives. I tried to trace the code, but it was a nightmare of nested encryptions and rerouted servers that bounced from Seoul to Frankfurt to Sao Paulo in milliseconds. It was untraceable. It was everywhere. It was like trying to find the source of the wind. This knowledge was a cold, heavy stone in my gut. But it also gave me a sliver of control. I turned my apartment into an analog bubble. I disconnected my router. I covered my television screen with a thick blanket. My phone, a constant source of anxiety, was shut down and placed in a drawer. I communicated with my clients via a payphone 2 blocks away, like a spy in a Cold War thriller. The pressure in my head lessened. The world outside my window was still fading, but inside my 14th-floor cave, language felt solid again. Wednesday had weight. Tomorrow held promise. Remember was a muscle I could flex. But the quiet outside my door was changing. It was no longer just placid. It was becoming organized. The change was subtle. The shuffling in the hallway now occurred at specific, regular intervals. Sometimes, I would press my ear to the door and hear a faint, rhythmic humming from the hallway, a low, single-note chant from multiple voices. One night, the fear escalated into something sharp and personal. I was working late by the light of a desk lamp, translating a manual on paper with a pen, a ridiculously archaic process. A faint scratching sound came from my front door. I froze, every nerve ending screaming. I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. Mrs. Nakata was there. She was tracing the symbol on my door with her fingernail. Her expression was serene, beatific. She was not vandalizing my property. She was anointing it. Blessing it. After a few minutes, she finished, placed her palm flat against the door for a moment as if imparting a final benediction, and then shuffled away. The next morning, I found a gift on my doormat. It was a single, perfect ginkgo leaf, bright yellow. A beautiful, simple object, detached from any context. It had no past, it was not from a tree in a park I loved. It had no future, it would not be pressed in a book to be looked at later. It was just a yellow leaf, for this moment, right now. It was an invitation. An offering. Let go, it seemed to say. Join us in the simple, beautiful now. The feeling of being watched was constant. When I left to get food, my neighbors in the hallway would turn their heads in unison to follow my progress. Their faces held no malice. Only a kind of placid curiosity, the way one might watch a complex machine performing a pointless task. I was the anomaly now. The ghost. The man who insisted on living in 1,000 different moments at once, while they had found peace in the purity of one. My desperate search for allies had been fruitless. The few old contacts I tried to reach by phone either didn't understand my panic or, worse, responded with the same hollowed-out language that terrified me. The world I was trying to save no longer believed it was in danger. Then, a breakthrough. On a deep web forum I accessed through a shielded Tor browser at a 24-hour internet cafe, I found a post. It was from a user named Chrono_Echo, hidden in a board dedicated to Forteana and unexplained phenomena. Is anyone else noticing the words disappearing? Not the words themselves, but the meaning behind them. Time. History. Causality. It's like the grammar of the universe is being erased. I'm in Fukuoka. It's happening here too. I nearly wept with relief. My fingers flew across the keyboard, sending a frantic, encrypted message. I see it too. You are not alone. It's the language. The concepts. And a symbol. A circle with a line. The reply came within an hour. The symbol. Yes. I see it everywhere. It's in the code. It's a signal. We need to talk. We arranged a video call for the following day, a supposedly secure, peer-to-peer connection. I broke my analog fast, my hands shaking as I reconnected my router and powered up my laptop. This was it. An ally. Someone to plan with. Someone to resist with. The call connected. A young woman appeared on my screen. She had tired eyes and hair tied back in a messy bun. Behind her, on the wall, was a large, framed poster. It was a minimalist art print of a circle, bisected by a single line. My blood ran cold. Chrono_Echo. I whispered. She smiled at me. And in that smile, I saw it. The same placid emptiness. The same serene disconnection. It was a trap. You wanted to talk, she said, her voice soft and even. About the things that are not now. She tilted her head, a gesture of genuine, gentle pity. Why? It is so much simpler here. In the circle. So much more peaceful. The message was clear. They weren't just passively spreading. They were actively seeking out the holdouts. The ones who still remembered Wednesday. Who are you? I stammered. We are the ones who are here, she said. Her smile widened slightly. And now, we know you are there. Soon, that will be the same. Soon, we will all be here. The call ended. I was left staring at my own terrified face, the knowledge crashing down on me like a physical weight. They knew my name. They knew my face. And they knew where I lived. The quiet contagion was no longer content to just spread. It was coming for me. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. The trap snapping shut changed the nature of the pressure. It was no longer a passive environmental force, it was active, personal, and focused. My apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like the center of a spider's web. The vibrations were all traveling towards me. The gifts continued, but they became more pointed. A cup of water, perfectly still. A bowl of uncooked rice, each grain a self-contained unit of being. A single, smooth, white stone that felt heavy with a significance I refused to accept. They were tools for meditation on the now, objects stripped of story. They were lessons. They were warnings. The humming in the hallways grew louder, more frequent. It was a constant, low-frequency thrum that seemed to vibrate in my bones. A sound designed to loosen the moorings of thought. I stuffed my ears with cotton, but I could still feel it. The confrontation came on a Tuesday, or what I fiercely insisted to myself was a Tuesday. A knock on the door. Not a scratch, not a shuffle, but a firm, deliberate rap. I looked through the peephole. It was Mr. Honda, the building manager, a man I'd only ever exchanged polite, hurried greetings with. He was a portly, balding man who always seemed stressed, always clutching a clipboard. Today, he was not clutching a clipboard. His hands were empty, held loosely at his sides. His face, usually a mask of harried obligation, was unnervingly calm. He was smiling that smile. The smile of the converted. I didn't open the door. Tanaka-san, he said, his voice muffled but clear. It was gentle, almost loving. May I have a moment? There is no need for the rent payment this month. A cold dread washed over me. The final pillar of the old world, transactional obligation, had crumbled. We are worried about you, Tanaka-san, he continued, his voice resonating with a strange, collective plural. You live in so many places at once. In the before time. In the after time. It must be so loud in your head. So heavy. I backed away from the door, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. We have a gift for you, he said. A release. You don't have to carry it all. The memory of your mother's face. The anxiety about your next deadline. The name of the day. They are just stories. They are not real. Only this is real. He paused. I could hear him take a slow, deep breath. Here. In the hallway. With us. It is quiet here. It is peace. This was the true horror. It wasn't an invasion or an attack. It was an act of salvation. They were missionaries of the void, and they saw my complex, anxious, memory-laden consciousness as a painful disease. They wanted to cure me. The terror was not that they would kill me, but that they would fix me. That I would open the door and thank them for it. In that moment, I knew I couldn't stay. To stay was to surrender, to be eroded by their quiet, loving pressure until I, too, found the hollow word in my mouth and smiled. My escape was not a panicked flight. It was a cold, calculated act of severance. I took my backpack, the one I used for weekend hikes in the mountains of Nara. I filled it not with survival gear, but with artifacts of the old world. A worn paperback copy of a Murakami novel, dense with metaphor and memory. My father's old analog watch, its ticking a tiny mechanical heartbeat. A bundle of cash. A stack of paper maps of Western Japan. A compass. A notebook and 3 sharp pencils. I took my laptop, my tablet, and my smartphone. I walked into the kitchen, filled the sink with water, and drowned them. I watched the screens flicker and die, a final, silent protest. Then, I took a hammer from my small toolkit and shattered them completely, destroying the gateways. I put on my jacket, took a deep breath, and walked to the door. This was the real confrontation. Not an argument, but an action. My choice against theirs. When I opened the door, they were there. Not just Mr. Honda. Mrs. Nakata was there. The young couple. The old man from the lounge. A dozen of my neighbors, standing silently in the muted hallway. They weren't blocking my path. They had formed 2 lines, creating a corridor for me to walk through. They watched me, their heads turning in that same slow, synchronized way. Their faces were not angry or sad. They were simply curious. Puzzled. They looked at me as if I were a strange mathematical proof that refused to be solved, an animal that, when offered a warm, safe enclosure, was choosing to walk back out into the freezing wilderness. Mr. Honda's smile was one of profound, gentle disappointment. I walked through their ranks. The silence was absolute. No one reached for me. No one spoke. Their collective gaze was a physical weight on my back. I did not run. I walked to the emergency stairwell, opened the heavy door, and began my descent. With each step down, I felt the humming fade, the pressure lessen. I was walking down out of their heaven, back into the messy, painful, beautiful world of time. I emerged into the noise of Osaka, a cacophony that now sounded like a symphony. The roar of traffic, the clang of the railway crossing, the overlapping chatter of a dozen conversations about plans and memories and deadlines, it was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. I didn't look back. Underscore 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 underscore. That was 6 months ago. I am in a small, forgotten fishing village on the coast of the Kii Peninsula. The mountains press the village against the sea, a place of sharp winds and the constant smell of salt and diesel. There are no digital billboards here. Internet is a slow, unreliable thing that comes through a single, ancient cable. People's lives are governed by the tide and the seasons, cycles so old they feel immune to the new silence. I work on the docks, mending nets. The work is hard, physical, and real. My hands are calloused, my face is weathered by the sun and sea spray. I am no longer a translator of technical manuals. I am a man who ties knots. I am safe, for now. But I am not cured. The contagion is not just a signal broadcast from a screen. It is an idea. And an idea, once understood, cannot be entirely forgotten. I am haunted by the peace I was offered. Sometimes, when I am alone, watching the waves crash against the seawall, the logic of it rises in my mind, seductive and serene. The beauty of a single moment, untroubled by regret or anticipation. The release from the burden of being a person. I fight it. I make myself remember. I recite the names of my childhood friends in Ohio. I picture the exact layout of my first apartment. I do complex multiplication in my head. And every night, before I sleep, I perform a small ritual. I take out my notebook, and I write down the day of the week, and what I did on that day. Monday. Mended the green net for Sato-san's boat. The wind was from the west. Saw a heron on the rocks. Remembered the taste of my grandmother's ramen. Tuesday. Hauled crates of mackerel. My back aches. Plan to buy new boots in town after the next paycheck. Tonight, I sit by my small window, my father's watch ticking on the sill. I look out at the dark, restless water. I take my pencil. I whisper the word to myself, a test, a prayer. Wednesday. For a terrifying, heart-stopping second, the word feels light in my mind. The meaning thins, threatening to detach, to drift away into the vast, quiet sea. For a sliver of an instant, it feels hollow. I grip the pencil tighter, the wood pressing into my skin, and force the thought back down. I am still here. In the messy, loud, painful world of time. But I know, with a certainty that chills me to my very soul, that a seed of their silence is in me. A quiet, patient seed, waiting for a moment of weakness, waiting for me to grow tired of remembering, and to finally accept the simple, terrible piece of the now. Expand to view model thoughts. Chevron_right. The man with the red clipboard. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. My life is a creature of habit, and Montreal is a city that rewards it. Every morning, I leave my apartment on Rue de la Gauchetière, the stale air of the hallway giving way to the diesel and maple syrup scent of the city waking up. I walk east, a straight shot to the archives where I work, a custodian of brittle paper and forgotten stories. I am an archivist. My job is to impose order on the chaos of the past, to find the patterns, to label the anomalies. It has, I fear, shaped the way I see the world. My route takes me past the Berry-UQAM metro station, a sprawling nexus of human traffic. Students, tourists, junkies, artists, businesspeople, a river of bodies that parts around islands of stillness. It was there, on the corner of St. Catherine and Berry, that I first saw him. He was an anomaly I couldn't label. He stood ramrod straight in a cheap, gray suit that seemed permanently rumpled. He held a bright, plastic red clipboard. He wasn't begging, or proselytizing, or surveying. He was just, standing. Staring straight ahead, his expression as blank as a fresh sheet of paper. People flowed around him as if he were a lamppost or a fire hydrant, a piece of urban furniture. The first time I saw him make the tick, I almost missed it. His right hand, holding a black ballpoint pen, moved with a small, precise motion. A downstroke. A little flick at the end. Tick. Then, stillness again. I thought nothing of it. A surveyor for the city, maybe. A very, very patient one. But he was there the next day. And the next. Always the same spot. Same suit. Same vacant stare. Same red clipboard. I started to notice the rhythm. It wasn't random. There was a deliberation to it, a cadence that felt unnervingly regular. The city has its own rhythms, the thrum of the metro underground, the coordinated gasp of traffic lights turning green, but this was different. This was metronomic. I began to see other, smaller glitches in the city's code. At the cafe where I bought my morning coffee, the young barista, a girl with purple hair and a nose ring, started doing something odd. Every morning, she would arrange the sugar packets in the dispenser into a perfect, repeating grid of pink, blue, and white. It wasn't just neat, it was obsessive. It took her a full minute, her movements deft and silent, while the line behind me grew. If I asked for a coffee while she was in the middle of her grid making, she wouldn't hear me until the final packet was in place. Sorry, she'd say, blinking as if coming out of a trance. What was that? At the archives, my colleague Jean-Pierre, a man whose desk was a testament to entropic decay, developed a tic. He would tap his pen on his desk. Not an idle, nervous tap, but a complex, syncopated rhythm. Tap tap tap, tap, tap tap tap. Over and over. The exact same pattern, for hours. Jean-Pierre, I said one afternoon, the sound drilling into my focus. The tapping. He looked up, his eyes clouded with confusion. What tapping? he asked, his pen held motionless above his blotter. The moment I looked away, it started again. Tap tap tap, tap, tap tap tap. These were small things. Quirks. The kind of oddities you expect in a city of 4 million people. It's easy to dismiss them, to file them away under stress or eccentricity. My own life was so ordered, perhaps I was just projecting a need for patterns onto the world, seeing them where none existed. That's what I told myself. It was a comforting lie. The lie began to unravel on a Tuesday in late October. The sky was the color of wet cement, and a miserable drizzle had thinned the clouds. It gave me a clearer view of the man with the red clipboard. I was early for work, the chill in the air making me walk faster. As I passed him, something about the way the weak light caught the clipboard seemed wrong. I stopped. He was 20 feet away. I pretended to check my phone, angling myself for a better look. The rain beaded on the clipboard's surface, slick and gleaming. I squinted, my breath misting in the air. There was no paper. The surface of the clipboard was a smooth, uninterrupted plane of white plastic. There were no lines, no boxes, no survey questions. Nothing. It was blank. My heart gave a painful little thump. I watched him. His gaze was fixed on some point far down the street. His hand was poised with the pen. I pulled out my phone and started the stopwatch. The seconds ticked by. 1 minute. 5. The drizzle intensified, plastering my hair to my forehead. At 9 minutes and 58 seconds, his hand moved. Tick. The pen point made a faint scratching sound against the plastic, leaving no mark. It was an act of pure, pointless fidelity. A cold dread, far colder than the rain, seeped into my bones. He wasn't recording anything. He was just performing the act of recording. I stayed. I had to know. I stood under the awning of a closed vape shop and watched him, my own routine shattered. Another 10 minutes passed. Tick. And another. Tick. An hour bled away in 10-minute increments. The digital stopwatch on my phone was my only anchor to a reality that suddenly felt thin and porous. In that hour, I saw him tick the blank clipboard 7 times. The thought was immediate and chilling. He'd missed one. Or maybe I had. The uncertainty was worse. I finally walked away, my mind reeling. The rhythmic tapping of Jean-Pierre's pen, the barista's sugar packet grid, they were no longer quirks. They were symptoms. I was an archivist of the past, but something was corrupting the archive of the present, writing new, nonsensical entries in a language I couldn't comprehend. And the man with the red clipboard, I was beginning to realize, wasn't just another entry. He was the author. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 2, Growing Awareness and Isolation. The next morning, I bought a new journal. A black moleskine, smooth and discreet. Its first entry wasn't a thought or a feeling, but a data point, 7:45 a.m. Corner of St. Catherine and Barry. Subject present. Gray suit. Red clipboard, blank. First observed tick, 7:51 and 14 seconds a.m. I became a spy in my own life. My daily commute transformed from a simple transit into a field observation exercise. I named him the Clipboard Man. I started a chart, mapping his ticks against the time of day, the weather, the density of the crowd. There was no correlation. There was only the rhythm, the relentless, 10-minute beat. Sometimes, there would be a gap, a missed tick that left a silent, screaming void in my data, sending a fresh wave of anxiety through me. Was the system failing? Or was my observation flawed? My world, once a comfortable routine, was now a collection of unnerving loops. The barista's sugar packets became the grid. Jean-Pierre's pen became the tapping. I started noticing more. A woman on the metro, always the same car, always the same seat, who folded and unfolded a single page of the Journal de Montreal into a complex origami shape, then unfolded it, then folded it again, for the entire journey from Berry-UQAM to Lionel Graux. A security guard in the lobby of a downtown office tower who spent his entire day polishing a single, hand-sized spot on a glass door. The spot was already immaculate. My attempts to share these observations were met with a peculiar, frictionless denial. "You know, the guy with the clipboard on the corner?" I asked Jean-Pierre during a coffee break. He frowned, stirring his coffee. "What guy?" "He's there every day. Gray suit. You must have seen him." "Can't say that I have," he said, his gaze distant. "You're seeing things, Elara." He walked away, and as he rounded the corner, I heard it start up again from the direction of his desk. Tap tap tap, tap, tap tap tap. I tried the barista. "That's a very specific way you arrange the sugar," I said, forcing a light tone. She looked at the perfectly arranged grid, then back at me, her smile placid and empty. "It's how they go," she said, as if it were a law of physics. There was no defensiveness, no explanation. Just a calm, unsettling statement of fact. This was the new horror, not outright denial, but a placid inability to see the strangeness. It was as if a filter had been placed over their perception, editing out the glitches. Or worse, as if the glitches had become so fundamental that they were no longer glitches at all. I was the one with the faulty filter. My isolation became a physical thing, a bubble of awareness in a sea of serene obliviousness. My archivist instincts took over. I dove into research, spending my evenings scrolling through online forums and academic databases. I searched for mass psychogenic illness, shared compulsions, folie à plusieurs. Nothing fit. The cases I read about were explosive, dramatic, fainting spells, twitching epidemics. This was the opposite. It was a contagion of quiet, meticulous pointlessness. It was creeping into the city's subconscious, not with a bang, but with a tick. It was during this time, buried in the sub-basement of the archives, that I found the secondary mystery that would become my obsession. I was tasked with cataloging a collection of unsorted municipal documents from the mid-20th century. Most of it was mind-numbing zoning disputes and budget reports. But in one dusty box, I found a tube of rolled schematics. They were hydroelectric plans for the downtown core, dated 1964. They were bizarre. Large sections were redacted with thick black ink. But what was visible was strange enough. The layouts were unusually geometric, almost fractal. And in the margins, penned in a spidery hand, were symbols that were not part of any standard engineering notation. They were small, glyph-like figures. One, in particular, made me freeze. It was a vertical line with a small, sharp hook at the bottom. It looked uncannily like the motion the clipboard man made with his pen. I showed them to my boss, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sylvie. She glanced at them dismissively. "Oh, those," she said. "The Finch plans. Alastair Finch. He was a city engineer back in the 60s. A brilliant man, they said, but a complete eccentric. A crank. Believed in ley lines and urban resonances. These plans were his pet project. The city council thought he was mad. They were never used. Alastair Finch. The name stuck in my mind. A crank who drew glyphs on city blueprints. A glyph that mirrored the tick of a man on a street corner 60 years later. It was a thread, thin and improbable, but it was the only one I had. The connections began to multiply, weaving a web of terrifying synchronicity. One afternoon, waiting on the metro platform, I saw the origami woman folding her newspaper page. Fold, crease, unfold. Across the tracks, a young man was tying his shoelace. He would tie the knot, pull it tight, then immediately untie it and start again. I watched them both, a cold knot forming in my stomach. The woman's hands moved with the same rhythm as the man's. Fold, crease, unfold. Tie, pull, untie. The roar of the approaching train filled the tunnel. The woman made her final, sharp crease. The man pulled his final knot. The train screeched to a halt in front of me, its doors sighing open at the exact same moment. It was perfect. Too perfect. It wasn't chaos. It was the opposite of chaos. It was a hidden, intricate order, a vast clockwork mechanism laid over the city. The people performing the loops were its cogs, unconscious and serene. And the clipboard man, I began to suspect with a certainty that chilled me to my soul, was not just a cog. He was the conductor, the metronome, the grim timekeeper for a silent, sprawling symphony. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. Alistair Finch became my ghost. I hunted him through the city's archives, a spectral presence in the margins of old documents. Sylvie, my boss, gave me a strange look when I requested access to the uncatalogued municipal engineering boxes, but she signed the forms. Don't get lost in the weeds, Elara, she warned. Some rabbit holes are just empty. But this one wasn't. In a forgotten box labeled Finch, A, miscellaneous, correspondence and notes, I found his mind on paper. It was a collection of journals, loose sheets, and letters, all filled with his spidery, obsessive scrawl. Reading them was like deciphering the thoughts of a man half drowning in a sea of cosmic revelation. He wrote of civic harmonics and resonant frequencies. He believed the city was not just a collection of steel and concrete, but a living psychic entity. Its energy, generated by the millions of minds within it, was chaotic and destructive if left untamed. But it could be harnessed. It could be tuned. His theory was terrifyingly elegant. He proposed creating a psychic grid by embedding specific, repeating patterns into the very infrastructure of the city. The precise intervals of traffic lights, the subaudible frequencies running through the electrical wiring, the exact resonant pitch of the steel girders in the metro tunnels, even the geometric layout of public squares. It was a form of mass, passive conditioning. Finch wasn't trying to control people's thoughts, not directly. He was trying to tune the background noise of reality itself, to create a subtle, pervasive harmony that would subconsciously guide the populace towards order, pacifying the city's chaotic soul. His notes grew more frantic towards the end. They called me mad, he wrote. But they don't understand the cacophony. They don't hear the scratching at the door. The pattern is the only defense. The rhythm is the only shield. The project was officially scrapped in 1965. But I knew, with the cold certainty of a coroner, that it hadn't been. It had been activated. It had been running silently for 60 years. And now, either through decay or evolution, it was beginning to surface. The loops were the grid made manifest, the system's maintenance routines imprinting themselves on the most receptive human minds. The clipboard man was its regulator, its primary node, his 10-minute tick a constant, living reinforcement of Finch's grand, terrifying design. The city began to feel different under the weight of this knowledge. The loops escalated. It wasn't just individuals anymore. One lunchtime, standing at a busy crosswalk on de Maisonneuve, I watched in frozen horror as every single person waiting for the light, a crowd of at least 30, simultaneously shifted their weight to their left foot. They held the pose for 3 seconds, a silent, uncoordinated flock of drab-coated flamingos, then shifted back just as the signal changed to walk. No one blinked. No one commented. They just crossed the street, their moment of bizarre synchronicity dissolving as if it had never happened. The environmental warping became more pronounced. It was no longer just a feeling. The hum of the fluorescent lights in the archives developed a distinct melody, a distorted, off-key version of Frère Jacques that played on a maddening loop only I seemed to hear. Shadows began to misbehave. Walking home at dusk, I saw a man's shadow on the pavement lag a full half-second behind him, catching up with a syrupy, unnatural lurch. I stared, my mouth dry, but the man just kept walking, oblivious that his own silhouette was struggling to keep up. My isolation felt absolute. I was a bug in the code, a conscious observer in a world of programmed actors. In a fit of desperation, I turned to the one place as chaotic and sprawling as Finch's theories, the internet. On a fringe urban exploration forum, under a thread about unexplained city phenomena, I made a cryptic post. I wrote about the rhythm and the silent symphony. Days later, I got a private message. The user was named Signal. You hear it too, the message read. The conductors are getting louder. The patterns are reinforcing. Meet me. Tomorrow. Noon. The Fountain Inn Square, St. Louis. A surge of adrenaline and hope shot through me. I wasn't alone. Signal was a young man named Leo, probably a student at UQAM. He was jittery, his eyes constantly scanning, not with fear, but with an ecstatic energy. He knew. He saw the loops, the synchronicity. He pointed out things I had missed, the way pigeons on the cobblestones always arranged themselves in perfect rhomboid clusters, the rhythmic dripping of a faulty drainpipe that matched the cadence of a nearby flashing, "Don't walk" sign. It's beautiful, isn't it? He whispered, his face alight. The symphony. Most people are just instruments, playing their part without knowing. But we're the lucky ones, Elara. We're the audience. My hope curdled into ice. The audience? I repeated. Leo, this isn't beautiful. It's wrong. It's a system breaking down. He laughed, a sharp, nervous sound. Breaking down? No, no, no. It's tuning up. It's the next stage. A new form of consciousness. Pure order. You just have to learn how to listen. How to participate. He leaned in closer, his eyes wide. What's your loop? You must have one. Everyone does. Maybe it's the way you stir your coffee. Or the path you walk to work. He reached out and tapped my shoulder, a quick, rhythmic pattern. Tap tap tap, tap. Jean-Pierre's rhythm. I recoiled as if burned. He wasn't an ally. He was a convert. A proselytizer for the quiet contagion. He wanted to join the clockwork, to become another mindless, ticking cog. I turned and fled, his calls of, "Don't fight it." Its harmony, echoing behind me. I was more alone than ever before. The final seal on my isolation was broken the next Monday at the archives. My boss, Sylvie, the sharpest woman I knew, came to work wearing her silk blouse inside out. The seams were starkly visible, the label poking out from the collar. "Sylvie," I said gently, pointing. "Your shirt." She looked down, a slow, curious motion. A vague, placid smile touched her lips. It was the same empty smile as the barista. "Oh, yes," she said, her voice soft and distant. "It prefers it this way. It prefers it this way." The simple, impossible sentence broke something in me. It wasn't just behavior anymore. It was cognition. It was language. The grid wasn't just making people tap their pens, it was making them believe their shirts had preferences. The contagion had breached the final firewall and was now rewriting the source code of sanity itself. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. My sanity had become a small, flickering candle in a world succumbing to a gentle, orderly gale. I couldn't outrun it. Leo had shown me that. Sylvie had shown me that. The only option left was to try and snuff out the source. My logic, frayed as it was, pointed to one place, one man. The man with the red clipboard. He was the metronome. If I could break his rhythm, maybe I could break the spell. The plan was crude, born of sleepless nights and caffeine-fueled desperation. I was going to intercept the tick. I returned to the corner of St. Catherine and Barry the next morning. The air was crisp and bright, the sky a painful, indifferent blue. The city hummed around me, its hidden symphony playing on. The clipboard man stood in his usual spot, a statue of mundane dread. I took up a position nearby, leaning against a wall, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I pulled out my phone. The stopwatch was already running in my mind. The minutes stretched into elastic eternities. 8 minutes. 9. The world seemed to slow down, the sounds of traffic and conversation fading into a low drone. It was just me and him and the silent, inexorable countdown. At 9 minutes and 57 seconds, I pushed off the wall. 3 steps. That's all it took. Just as his hand began its familiar, precise descent, I reached out and closed my fingers around his wrist. My touch was surprisingly firm. His skin was cool and dry. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. And then, the world did not stop. He did. He turned his head. It was the first time I had ever seen him move with any volition. The motion was slow, deliberate, ancient. He looked at me. His eyes were not vacant. They were not the eyes of a madman or an automaton. They were deep and intelligent and filled with a weariness that felt geological in scale. He didn't speak, but a voice bloomed in the center of my mind, a thought that was not my own. It was not a single voice, but a chorus, a mesh of concepts and intentions. In it, I could feel the frantic genius of Alastair Finch, the cold logic of the grid's mathematics, and something else, something vastly older and stranger. The pattern is not a cage, the chorus thought at me, the concept flooding my consciousness. It is a shield. Images, not memories, cascaded through my mind. I saw Finch, not as a crank, but as a terrified psychic, a man who had accidentally stumbled upon a frequency that let him perceive the true nature of reality. He hadn't invented the grid. He had discovered it, or a fragment of it. An ancient, impossibly complex architecture designed not to control what was inside, but to keep something out. The cacophony, his old words echoed in my head. The scratching at the door. The loops, the ticks, the symphony, they were a defense. A mantra woven into the fabric of the world. A cosmic firewall built from rhythmic thoughts and synchronized actions. The ticks on the blank clipboard were not a count of anything. They were patches. Maintenance. A constant, manual reinforcement of the pattern, sealing the microscopic cracks that were always forming in the walls of reality. By stopping the tick, I hadn't broken a spell. I had opened a door. The man, the entity, the conductor, gently pulled his wrist from my grasp. The pressure in my mind vanished. And in the sudden silence, I felt a change in the world. The familiar, subliminal hum of the city, Finch's grid, faltered. It was like a power outage of the soul. In the void of that silence, I heard it. A thin, dry, scratching sound. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once, the sound of insects burrowing through paper. Of static on a dead channel, of something dragging itself across the threshold of perception. My gaze shot to an alleyway across the street. The shadow of a dumpster detached from the wall. It wasn't a shadow anymore. It was a patch of active, hungry nothingness, unfurling with a fluid, non-Euclidean geometry that made my eyes water. The clipboard man turned his gaze from me back towards the impossible vista of the street. His face was a mask of grim concentration. He raised his pen. With a sharp, definitive click that seemed to echo through the entire city, he made the tick I had interrupted. The hum snapped back on, louder, more insistent than before. The scratching sound vanished. The thing in the alleyway flattened instantly, becoming a simple, two-dimensional shadow once more, obedient to the laws of light. The world was saved. Or at least, the crack was patched. The clipboard man looked at me one last time. There was no anger in his ancient eyes. Only a grim, weary acknowledgement. He had shown me the lock on the door. He had shown me the monster on the other side. And he had shown me the key. I walked away from the corner, my legs unsteady. The city looked the same, but it was irrevocably changed for me. I was no longer an observer, I was a custodian of a terrible secret. I saw the origami woman on the metro, her hands folding and unfolding, and I no longer felt fear. I felt a strange, solemn kinship. I saw the barista creating her perfect sugar grid and understood it not as a compulsion, but as a prayer. They were the sentinels. The unconscious guardians, their small, pointless loops another layer in the shield wall. My own personal hell had been reframed as a terrifying, necessary order. A week later, I was sitting at my desk in the archives. The distorted tune of Frère Jacques still hummed from the lights above, but now it sounded less like a glitch and more like a lullaby. The day's work was done. The papers were filed. I picked up my pen. My hand paused over the blotter. I thought of the scratching sound. I thought of the shadow that moved on its own. I thought of the endless, weary watch of the man with the red clipboard. My fingers tightened on the pen. I began to tap. Tap tap tap, tap, tap tap tap. A simple, 4-beat rhythm. Over and over. Not out of compulsion. Not anymore. It was a choice. A small, quiet contribution to the symphony. My own stitch in the pattern. My own reinforcement of the wall. Someone has to. The quiet contagion. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. I have always hated the touch of linen. It's a primal, physical aversion. The fabric feels dishonest, pretending to be soft while harboring a coarse, scratchy heart. It's the texture of dusty attics, of forgotten things, of the cheap, stiff suit my grandfather was buried in. It catches on the slightest patch of dry skin, a tiny, rasping snag that sets my teeth on edge. So when the world decided to fall in love with it, I felt personally attacked. It began at work, in the gray, recycled air confines of the Lambeth Council Records Department. My job is a study in beige desks, beige computers, beige folders filled with the beige details of other people's lives. I am an archivist, a professional warden of the mundane. My life, lived in my late brother Tariq's small flat on the Braddon estate, was as ordered and predictable as the Dewey Decimal System. Until Helena discovered her scarf. Helena sits opposite me, a woman whose personality is usually as muted as her pastel cardigans. One Tuesday, she came in wearing a new scarf, the color of undyed flax. All morning, she didn't work. She simply sat, her head bowed, running the fabric between her thumb and forefinger. Her lips moved, but the sounds were lost in the hum of the office servers. During our lunch break, I asked her about it. New scarf, Helena. It's nice. Her eyes, when she lifted them, seemed unfocused, looking at a point somewhere past my shoulder. It breathes, she whispered, a strange reverence in her voice. She held it out to me. Feel it. It breathes so clean. I recoiled instinctively. No, I'm all right. I'm not much of a linen person. A flicker of something, confusion. Pity, crossed her face before it settled back into that placid mask. She returned to her communion with the scarf, leaving me to my sandwich, which now tasted of dust. That was the first thread. Soon, there were more. David from accounting, a man who had worn the same rotation of shiny polyester shirts for the 5 years I'd known him, appeared one morning in a stiff, beige linen button-down. It was ill-fitting, creasing sharply at the elbows, yet he wore it with an air of profound satisfaction, occasionally stopping mid-spreadsheet to press his palm flat against his chest, a beatific smile on his face. The break room began to change. The stale scent of microwaved soup and instant coffee was gradually replaced by something else. An earthy, organic smell, like damp soil and sun-dried straw. I pinpointed the source a week later. Someone had started taping small, 2-inch squares of linen to the underside of every chair. Cream, ecru, oatmeal, beige. A silent, fibrous infestation. I peeled one off. The texture was rough, unsettlingly so. I asked who was doing it. No one knew. Or, more accurately, no one seemed to care. They just nodded, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "It freshens the place up," said David, his eyes crinkling in that new, serene way. I felt a prickle of unease, the kind you get when you walk into a room and feel you've just missed the punchline of a joke everyone else is in on. I tried to rationalize it. It was a fad. A viral wellness trend, like mindfulness apps or drinking kombucha. London was a city of fads, ephemeral and nonsensical. This was just another one. A particularly tactile, beige one. I took the bus home to Kennington, to the Braddon estate. It's a 1960s concrete beast, a grid of stained walkways and identical balconies, softened only by the stubborn tenacity of weeds and the colorful chaos of its residents. For the 2 years since Tariq's disappearance, it had been my sanctuary, a place of familiar grit and anonymous comfort. But the contagion was here, too. Mr. Henderson from 3B was out on his balcony, not smoking his usual roll-up, but meticulously, silently, relining a hanging basket with strips of what looked like raw flax. Mrs. Petrova, the block's matriarch, whose floral housecoats were a local landmark, was sweeping the walkway in a simple, sack-like linen dress. She smiled at me, a wide, empty smile that didn't reach her usually sharp eyes. "Such a good day, Elias," she said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "You can feel the air moving right through." I nodded, my throat tight, and hurried to my flat on the 5th floor. Tariq's flat. It still felt like his. His books on investigative journalism and urban exploration lined the walls. His favorite mug, chipped at the rim, sat by the sink. His absence was a physical presence, a void I navigated every day. He hadn't just left, he had vanished. One day he was chasing a story about dodgy property developers, the next, his phone was dead, his bank account untouched, his life frozen mid-sentence. The police had called it a classic case of a young man wanting to start over. I knew my brother. Tariq didn't run. He dug. Inside, I locked the door and leaned against it, my heart thudding. The world outside was a low, constant hum, but tonight it seemed different. It felt textured. I went to the window and looked down at the estate's central courtyard. A group of teenagers were gathered, not causing trouble, not playing music, but sitting in a silent circle. In the center of the circle was a single object, a wooden clothes horse, the kind for indoor drying, draped with long sheets of linen that billowed gently in the evening breeze. The teenagers just watched it, their faces bathed in the orange glow of the streetlights, rapt and silent. This wasn't a fad. A fad is loud. A fad is exclusive. This was quiet. It was pervasive. And it was spreading. That night, I dreamt of textures. I was in a vast, empty room, and the floor was covered in a single, seamless sheet of linen. I was barefoot, and every step was a fresh agony, the rough fibers catching on my skin, sending juddering shocks up my spine. I tried to run, but the fabric seemed to cling, to pull, to hold me in place. I woke up sweating, my own cotton bed sheets feeling alien and hostile against my skin. The next morning, I found it. A single, pale beige thread, tucked into the rubber seal of my front door. It wasn't blown there by the wind. It was placed. Deliberately. I plucked it out with tweezers, my fingers refusing to make contact. It was coarse, strong, and as I held it up to the light, I felt a dizzying, irrational fear. It was a message. A greeting. An invitation. I dropped the thread in the sink and ran the hot water until it was washed away, but I couldn't wash away the feeling. The feeling that the quiet, breathing world outside was waiting patiently for me to join in, and that it wouldn't take no for an answer. I was living on an island, and the tide was rising, a slow, fibrous tide of beige. And I was the only one who seemed to notice we were all about to drown in it. Phase 2, growing awareness and isolation. The world didn't get louder, it got quieter. The normal sounds of the Braddon estate, shouting matches, tinny music from open windows, the rumble of the tube from the nearby Oval station, began to mute. They were replaced by a different kind of sound, one you felt more than heard, the whisper-soft rustle of fabric. It was the collective sigh of 1,000 linen shirts, the shushing of flax trousers, the faint, dry crackle as people moved. I started a journal, a password-protected file on my work computer, titled Beige Observations. It felt paranoid, unhinged, but it was the only way to hold on to the sharp edges of my own reality. October 12th, postman no longer whistles. Wears a linen mailbag. Saw him pause to smooth it, his hand lingering for a full minute. His expression was one of intense concentration, as if he were listening to it. October 15th, the corner shop has changed. The usual clutter of sweet wrappers and tabloids is gone. The shelves are sparser, cleaner. The proprietor, Mr. Anand, has replaced the plastic carrier bags with rough-spun linen totes. He offered one to me, his eyes wide and earnest. "Better," he said. "Let's the groceries breathe." I bought a single apple and carried it in my hands. October 19th, Helena tried to give me a gift. A small, neatly folded linen handkerchief. "For your pocket," she said. "It will calm you." The earthy smell coming off it was stronger now, richer. Like a freshly opened grave. I told her I had allergies. The look of serene disappointment on her face was more chilling than any anger could have been. My isolation became a tangible thing, a bubble of silence and frantic observation in a world that had found a new, placid faith. I tried, once more, to breach it. I caught Mrs. Petrova on the walkway, watering a window box that now sprouted not geraniums, but tall, willowy flax plants. "Mrs. Petrova," I began, my voice sounding harsh in the quiet air. "Don't you think this is all a bit strange? The linen, everyone wearing it, the quiet." She turned from her plants, a trowel in her hand. Her linen dress was smudged with soil. "Strange," she repeated, the word sounding foreign on her tongue. She looked around at the silent balconies, the rustling flax. "No, Elias. It's not strange. It's correct. It was so noisy before. So complicated. This is simple." She reached out to touch my sleeve, my cheap cotton blend jacket. Her fingers recoiled slightly, as if from something unpleasant. "You're still so tangled." That was the last time I tried to talk to anyone about it. They were no longer the people I knew. Their memories were intact, they could recall shared histories, but their core programming had been overwritten with a new, simple directive: embrace the fabric. They looked at me with a kind of gentle concern, the way one might look at a frantic bird beating itself against a windowpane, unable to comprehend the clear, open air just inches away. I was the one who was wrong. I was the tangled one. My paranoia drove me back to the only mystery I felt I might have a chance of solving: Tarek. If anyone could make sense of a world turning quietly mad, it was him. He thrived on the esoteric, the unexplained. His side of the flat was a testament to it: books on ley lines, hollow earth theory, cryptids. I had always dismissed it as his romantic side, a foil to my own rigid pragmatism. Now, I wasn't so sure. I spent my evenings and weekends sifting through his life, a digital archaeologist. I went through his bank statements, call logs, social media, all cold trails, frozen on the day he vanished 2 years ago. The last charge on his card was for a coffee near London Bridge. The last call was to a number I didn't recognize, which was now disconnected. His last tweet was a photo of the Shard, captioned, "Sometimes you have to look at things from a different angle." His laptop was my final hope. It was an old machine, covered in stickers for bands and political causes. Most of his files were what I expected: notes for articles, interview transcripts about council corruption, photos of urban decay. Standard Tariq. But there was one folder on his desktop that was different. It was named with a single, cryptic character, a sort of spiraling glyph. And it was password protected. The password hint was, "Where the threads meet." Threads. The word hit me like a physical blow. It had to be a coincidence. This was from 2 years ago. The linen was new. Wasn't it? My own timeline began to feel fluid, unreliable. Had I just not been paying attention? For days, I obsessed over the password. I tried everything. Names of places we'd gone as kids, inside jokes, old addresses, pet names. Nothing worked. Where the threads meet. It was a poetic, infuriatingly vague clue, so typical of my brother. Desperate, I turned to his physical notes, a chaotic pile of moleskine notebooks filled with his sprawling handwriting. In the back of one, tucked into a paper flap, I found a business card. It was made of thick, gray cardstock. It read, "The Unraveling. Silas. We see the patterns others ignore." Below it was a web address and an email. The website was a fever dream of fringe theories. It was a mess of blinking GIFs, scrolling text, and dense articles about everything from chemtrails to the reptilian agenda. It was exactly the sort of place Tariq would have been drawn to. I used the site's search function and typed in "fabric." There were a dozen hits, but one stood out. A post from 3 years ago titled, "Symbiotic Textiles and Mimetic Weaves." It was written by this Silas. The prose was breathless, conspiratorial. It spoke of ancient organisms that mimicked fabrics, spreading not like viruses, but like ideas, through touch and proximity. It claimed certain materials could reweave human thought, replacing anxiety with placid obedience. It was insane. It was also the first thing that had come close to describing what I was seeing. The post ended with a chilling line, "They are patient. They can wait for the right season, the right fashion, the right collective sigh of a weary world." My hands were shaking. Tariq had been reading this. He had the man's card. He must have been looking into something like this long before I ever noticed Helena's scarf. I composed an email to the address on the card. Subject, "Where the threads meet." My name is Elias. My brother, Tariq, may have been in contact with you. He disappeared 2 years ago. I think he was investigating something to do with fabric. People are changing. I need to understand. I think you might be the only other person who sees it. I hit send, my heart hammering against my ribs. I felt a sliver of hope, the first in months. I was no longer an island. I had sent out a message in a bottle. The response came less than an hour later. It was short. "They're not changing, Elias. They're ripening. Meet me. The Grapes, Limehouse. Tomorrow, 9 p.m. Come alone. Don't wear linen." A new dread mixed with the hope. Ripening. The word suggested a harvest. The next day, the environmental warping began. It started small. The streetlights on the estate, which had always cast a steady, sickly orange, began to flicker. Not randomly, but in a slow, rhythmic pulse. A long pulse, followed by 2 short ones. Over and over. It was a pattern, like Morse code. It felt like the estate itself was breathing. Then I saw the shadows. Standing at my window, I watched a woman in a long linen coat walk across the courtyard. Her shadow, stretched out behind her in the low afternoon sun, didn't quite match her movements. As she paused, the shadow continued for a split second longer, its dark arms reaching, swaying, before snapping back into place. I blinked, convinced my sleep-deprived eyes were tricking me. But I saw it again. And again. The shadows of the linen people were becoming unstuck. That evening, as I got ready to leave for the pub, I noticed something on my own windowpane. Condensation had formed in the cool air. But it wasn't a random misting. Etched into the moisture, as if drawn by an invisible finger, were delicate, intricate patterns. They were floral, geometric. I recognized them instantly from a botany book of Tariq's I'd been looking through. They were the flowers of the flax plant. They were on the inside of the glass. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. The Grapes was an ancient pub, leaning precariously over the dark waters of the Thames. It smelled of stale beer, wood smoke, and river mud, a holy trinity of scents that felt blessedly, reassuringly normal. I found Silas in a dark corner booth, a halo of vape smoke around his head. He was a wiry man in his late 40s, with the restless, darting eyes of a cornered animal. He wore a patched-up army jacket and a black beanie, a uniform of deliberate nonconformity. "Elias," he said, without preamble. "You look spooked." "Good. You should be." He took a long drag from his vape. "Your brother was a smart kid. A romantic, but smart. He got closer than anyone." "Closer to what?" I asked, sliding into the booth. The worn leather was cool against my back. "The loom. The weaver. The root. It has a lot of names, none of them ours." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It's not a fungus, not a plant, not a mimetic virus. It's all of them and none of them. Think of it as a parasitic reality. A substrate that grows underneath our own. The fibers, the linen, are just its tendrils, its user interface." It sounded like the ravings of a madman, but it resonated with a terrifying clarity against the things I had seen. The pulsing lights, the unstuck shadows, the flowers on my window. "Your brother," Silas continued, "he found the point of entry. Or at least, a modern one. A company called Blackwood Flax Mill. It was a Victorian enterprise, built on reclaimed marshland not far from where your estate now stands. Famous for producing the finest linen in the empire. Also famous for its workforce. Docile. Content. Never went on strike. Lived in company houses, wore company clothes. They worked until they died, and they died happy." My blood ran cold. "What happened to the mill?" "Burned down. 1888, mysterious circumstances. The official story is that the specific varietal of flax they used, Linum niger, was lost forever in the fire. Tariq didn't think so. He thought it just went dormant. Waiting." Suddenly, the password hint clicked into place with sickening precision. It wasn't a place. It was a name. "Blackwood," I whispered. Silas nodded slowly. "Your brother was looking for the old foundations, the root cellar. He thought something was left. A spore, a seed, a single thread. Something that could be reactivated. Something that could start weaving again." I went home and typed Blackwood into the password field on Tariq's laptop. The folder opened. It was a nightmare archive. Tariq had digitized everything. Old newspaper clippings about the contented workers of the Blackwood Mill. Botanical drawings of Linum niger, its flowers an unnerving shade of near black. He'd found architectural plans for the mill, and overlaid them with a modern map of the Braddon estate. The mill's main processing floor, the place where the raw flax was repped, a process of controlled rotting to separate the fibers, was directly beneath Block C. My block. The final file was a sound recording. It was labeled Sample 1. I put on my headphones and clicked play. At first, there was only static. Then, underneath it, a low, rhythmic sound. A soft, wet, fibrous shuffling. And a whisper. It was a woman's voice, distorted by the recording, but the word was clear, repeated over and over like a mantra. "Breathe, breathe, breathe." I ripped the headphones off. The sound was still there, Faint, not in my ears, but in the room around me. It was coming from the walls. The floor. The building itself was breathing. The contagion was no longer passive. The ripening was accelerating. The linen people, as I now thought of them, began to act in concert. They didn't speak to each other, but they moved with a shared, unspoken purpose. I saw them in the courtyard at dawn, their hands plunged deep into the communal flower beds. They weren't weeding. They were planting. Rows and rows of thin, green shoots were now pushing up through the soil. Flax. They started tending to the estate itself. One morning, I saw a dozen of them on the roof of Block A, not fixing the perpetually leaky asphalt, but stretching vast sheets of linen over it, anchoring them with rocks. They were swaddling the buildings. I saw another group in the damp, dripping Undercroft car park, weaving thick, rope-like braids of flax and hanging them from the concrete pillars, like strange, organic decorations. They were building a nest. My alliance with Silas was my only lifeline, a frantic exchange of emails and texts. He was brilliant, obsessive, and dangerously reckless. While I documented, he wanted to act. "We need a sample of the new crop," he wrote. "I need to see if it's the original strain. If I can analyze its structure, maybe I can find a frequency, a chemical, something that disrupts the weave." I begged him not to. "They're not just people in weird clothes anymore, Silas. They're caretakers. Gardeners. They're protecting it. Fear is how it wins, Elias. Your brother knew that." That was the last message he sent. 2 days passed in agonizing silence. On the third day, I saw him. He was walking across the courtyard, his frantic energy gone, replaced by a slow, measured calm. He had traded his army jacket for a crisp, cream-colored linen shirt. He looked clean. Simple. He passed directly below my window and for a moment, he looked up, his eyes meeting mine. There was no recognition. No sign of the panicked, brilliant man I'd met in the pub. There was only a placid, untroubled emptiness. He gave a slight, serene nod, and then continued on his way to join a group that was methodically polishing the estate's railings with linen cloths. He hadn't been converted. He had been assimilated. My message in a bottle had washed ashore, only for the recipient to walk calmly into the sea. The isolation was absolute now. I was a ghost in my own home. The gentle, rhythmic breathing of the building was a constant reminder that I was living inside the belly of the beast. The earthy smell of flax and damp soil seeped through the vents, a constant, cloying perfume. My supplies were running low. The corner shop was a no-go zone, its shelves now stocked almost exclusively with flax seeds, linseed oil, and linen tote bags. The idea of the supermarket, of the tube, of navigating a city of potential converts, was terrifying. I was a prisoner in Tariq's fifth-floor flat. The stakes had escalated beyond my own sanity. This wasn't just about a strange social phenomenon anymore. It was about consumption. Not of flesh, but of will. Of identity. The world wasn't ending in a bang, but in a quiet, collective exhale. The last bastion of my old reality was this flat, these walls filled with Tariq's restless energy. But the walls were breathing. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the weaver wanted its lost thread back. It wanted what was left of my brother. And it was coming through me to get it. One evening, I noticed a change in the plaster of the living room wall, the one that faced the center of the estate. A fine, web-like pattern of cracks had appeared. As I watched, a single, pale fiber pushed its way through the paint. Like a questing root. It was thin and delicate, and it swayed gently in the still air of the room. The nest was breaching the shell. Phase 4, Confrontation and Aftermath. The tendril on the wall was the final summons. It grew slowly, deliberately, a pale finger beckoning me from the plaster. The breathing of the building was louder now, a constant, soothing systole and diastole that vibrated through the soles of my feet. The choice was no longer about staying or leaving. It was about descending. I had to see what Tariq had found. I had to stand in the place where the threads met. It was the only act of free will I had left. Armed with a torch and Tariq's overlaid map, I waited until the dead of night. The estate was silent, but it was an active, watchful silence. The draped sheets on the rooftops billowed like lungs. The braided ropes in the undercroft seemed to tighten and shift in my peripheral vision. The entrance was where Tariq had marked it on the plans, behind a corroded maintenance hatch in the disused boiler room at the base of my block. The lock was rusted solid. I used a crowbar from Tariq's toolbox, the screech of metal on metal sounding like a blasphemy in the quiet. The air that puffed out was thick, humid, and heavy with that now familiar smell of earth and flax, but 1,000 times more concentrated. It was the scent of the source. The tunnel beyond was old brickwork, slick with moisture. It descended steeply into the earth, the path lit only by the bouncing beam of my torch. The breathing sound grew stronger with every step, a deep, organic resonance. It wasn't just in the walls, it was the air itself. The tunnel opened into a vast, cavernous space. It was the old redding floor of the Blackwood Mill, but it was no longer a cellar of brick and stone. It was a womb. Great, ropey bundles of luminous fibers, thick as ship's cables, pulsed with a soft, internal, milky white light. They carpeted the floor, clung to the walls, and wove themselves through the vaulted ceiling, disappearing upwards into the foundations of the building above. It was a single, colossal organism, a living loom that stretched out in every direction. The air was warm, and the deep, rhythmic breathing was the sound of its life. Dozens of figures moved through the space, their forms softened in the dim light. The linen people. They moved with a slow, reverent grace, tending to the organism. Some gently stroked the thick, pulsing cables. Others pruned smaller fibers with their bare hands. One man knelt, pressing his ear to the living floor, a look of ecstatic bliss on his face. They were priests. They were gardeners. They were cells in a larger body. My torch beam cut through the gloom, and I saw it. The heart of the loom. In the center of the cavern, the fibers coalesced into a dense, throne-like structure. And woven into it, half submerged in the living tapestry, was a figure. Even encased in the glowing threads, I recognized the worn denim jacket, the familiar slump of the shoulders. Tariq, I breathed, the name a dead thing in the living air. He was not dead. He was not alive. He was preserved. An integral part of the design. His eyes were closed, his face as placid and untroubled as everyone else's. The fibers grew into and out of him, a seamless integration of flesh and fabric. He was a central node, a battery, his restless, searching energy now powering this quiet, patient God. I understood then what had happened to him. He had found the source, and it had recognized him. It had welcomed him home. This wasn't an invasion. It was a reclamation. This thing didn't hate us for our noise, our anxiety, our furious, complicated lives. It pitted us. It offered a cure. An end to the struggle, to the isolation, to the 1,000 tiny cuts of being a separate, thinking consciousness. It offered connection. Unity. The simple, clean piece of being a single thread in a perfect, eternal weave. As I stood there, frozen in horror and a strange, terrible understanding, a single fiber detached itself from the mass on the floor. It was slender and pale, and it moved with a serpentine grace, gliding over the fibrous ground towards me. It didn't menace. It invited. It stopped a foot away from my shoe, the tip rising like the head of a cobra, swaying gently. My every instinct screamed at me to run, to scramble back up the tunnel into a world that was no longer mine, to live as a hunted, paranoid ghost until they found me. But I looked at Tariq's still form, at the serene bliss on the faces of the caretakers. I thought of the constant, gnawing anxiety of my life, the crushing weight of my brother's absence, the profound loneliness of being the last sane man. The fiber crept closer. It brushed against the back of my hand. I didn't feel the coarse scratchiness I had always hated. The touch was cool, then warm. There was no pain. Instead, a wave of profound, shocking calm washed over me. The frantic monologue in my head, the voice that had been screaming for months, simply stopped. The silence it left behind was beautiful. A thought, not in words, but in pure sensation, bloomed in my mind. Simple. Clean. Connected. No more struggle. Join. Breathe. I looked at the thread, then at my brother's face, peaceful in his fibrous cradle. He wasn't gone. He was just part of something larger. And he was waiting for me. The chaos and fear receded, replaced by a simple, elegant logic. The world wasn't ending. It was being mended. I have always hated the touch of linen. But perhaps I was wrong. My hand, of its own volition, reached out. The fiber wrapped gently around my fingers, a soft and welcoming caress. The touch against my skin wasn't scratchy or rough anymore. It felt like coming home. The quiet contagion. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. There are 3 fundamental truths in my life. 1, my name is Alara Vance. 2, I am, against all better judgment and the advice of my bank account, a PhD candidate in theoretical linguistics at the University of Otago. 3, the Patterson Memorial Library has the best armchair on the 2nd floor, a faded green relic tucked away in the 400 section, perfect for wrestling with Chomsky's ghost. Except, it seems, for the 3rd truth. Which is, according to everyone, not a truth at all. It started on a Tuesday. A miserably wet Dunedin Tuesday, where the sky was the color of an old bruise and the damp seeped into the marrow of your bones. My dissertation was fighting me, a tangled beast of semantic primitives and syntactic trees that refused to be tamed. I needed a specific volume of oceanic linguistics, a dusty 1978 edition I knew for a fact sat on the 3rd shelf down in the serials collection. I'd consulted it just last week, noting the coffee ring stain on page 84. So I bundled up, my breath pluming in the chill air, and walked the familiar route from my flat on Harriet Row, down the steep incline towards the university campus. I cut across the Leith, the water churning gray and angry, and turned onto Albany Street. I was anticipating the quiet hush, the scent of old paper and floor polish, the comforting weight of accumulated knowledge. But where the grand, neo-Gothic stone entrance of the Patterson Memorial Library should have been, there was something else. The building was the same. The same gray stone, the same imposing archway, the same lead-lined windows staring blankly out at the rain-slicked street. But the gilded letters above the door were gone. In their place was a sterile, black-on-white plastic sign that read, Municipal Sorting Facility, NO Public Admittance. I stopped dead in the middle of the pavement, a passing cyclist swerving around me with a curse. It didn't make sense. It was like seeing your own house painted a different color overnight, a fundamental violation of the world's proper order. The heavy oak doors I'd pushed through 100 times were replaced with a solid sheet of metal, featureless save for a small, intimidating keypad. The windows, which had always glowed with warm light in the evenings, were dark, opaque, as if painted black from the inside. My first thought, embarrassingly, was that I'd taken a wrong turn. That my sleep-deprived brain had finally short-circuited and I'd wandered onto a street I didn't know, one that just happened to have a doppelganger of the library. But no, there was the campus co-op on the corner, its lights a cheerful beacon. There was the familiar graffiti on the opposite wall. This was the right place. The building was right. The sign was wrong. My mind scrambled for a rational explanation. A sudden, unannounced renovation. A temporary relocation. But to change the very name of the building? And why a municipal sorting facility? What did the city even sort that would require such a grand, historic structure? I pulled out my phone, my fingers numb and clumsy in the cold. I dialed my supervisor, Dr. Albright. He'd know. He practically lived in the library. Graham, I said, when he picked up, his voice a familiar, dry crackle. It's Alara. A quick, strange question. What's going on at the Patterson? A pause. The what? The Patterson Library, I repeated, enunciating carefully. They've changed the sign. It says it's a sorting facility now. The silence on the other end of the line was longer this time, freighted with a kind of weary confusion I knew all too well. It was the sound he made when I was trying to defend a particularly weak thesis point. Alara, are you feeling all right? You sound stressed. There's no Patterson Library. I assume you mean the Robertson Library, the central one. That's on Moray Place. It hasn't moved. No, not the Robertson, I insisted, my voice rising with a frantic edge. The Patterson. The university's research library. On Albany Street. The big stone one. The big stone building on Albany is the municipal sorting facility, Alara, he said, his tone now a careful blend of patience and concern. It's been there for as long as I can remember. Deals with, I don't know, recycling, logistics or data processing. Something terribly dull. Are you sure you haven't just gotten turned around? My blood ran cold. Graham, I was in there last week. I borrowed a book. Were you? Well, perhaps you borrowed it from the Robertson and are just mixing up the buildings. It happens. Listen, you've been burning the candle at both ends. Take the afternoon off. Get some rest. We can look at your chapter draft tomorrow. He hung up before I could argue further. I stood there, phone in hand, the rain plastering my hair to my forehead. It was impossible. I wasn't just mixing it up. The Robertson was all modern glass and steel, a completely different building in a different part of the city. The Patterson was, it was real. I could still smell it. The dry, dusty scent of the history section, the faint tang of ozone from the photocopiers, the lavender hand soap in the women's bathroom on the ground floor. I remembered the squeak of the fourth stair on the main staircase, the satisfying clunk of the return chute. These weren't abstract facts. They were sensory memories, embedded in my bones. I walked the perimeter of the building, my hand trailing against the cold, damp stone. No signs of construction, no notices of change. It looked permanent. Settled. As if it had always been this way. I peered at the darkened windows, but saw only my own distorted reflection, a pale, worried face staring back. Back in my flat, I tried to prove I wasn't insane. I tore through my backpack, looking for the book I'd borrowed. It wasn't there. I couldn't even remember the exact title now, my mind felt like a sieve. I logged on to the university's online library catalog, my heart hammering against my ribs. I typed Patterson Memorial Library into the search bar. 0 results found. I tried variations. Patterson Library. Albany Street Library. Nothing. It was as if the digital world had conspired with the physical one to erase it. I searched my own browser history, looking for the library's opening hours page I'd checked last week. Gone. My emails. Nothing. My world, which had been built on the solid bedrock of facts, research, and verifiable data, was suddenly sand. I thought about the armchair. The green armchair. It was such a specific, trivial detail. The fabric was worn smooth on the arms, and there was a small tear in the seat cushion. Patched with a slightly mismatched piece of dark green corduroy. I had sat in it for hours, my legs tucked under me, the weight of a book in my lap. How can you invent a memory with that much texture? The next day, I approached my friend, Chloe, at the campus cafe. She was a history post-grad, a pragmatist with little time for fanciful notions. Chloe, I began, trying to sound casual, random question. Do you remember ever going to the Patterson Library? She looked up from her laptop, a small frown creasing her brow. The Watterson. Patterson. The old library on Albany Street. She shook her head, taking a sip of her flat white. Nope. Don't think I know it. Is it new? No, I said, my throat tightening. It's old. Neo-Gothic stone building. Oh. Her face lit up with recognition, and a wild, desperate hope surged in my chest. You mean the old sorting facility? Weird building. Looks like something out of a Batman movie. God knows what they actually do in there. Never seen anyone go in or out. The hope died as quickly as it had come, leaving a sick, hollow feeling in its wake. She saw the same thing Graham did. The same thing the sign said. Right, I mumbled, staring into my own cup of coffee. The sorting facility. That's the one. I spent the rest of the day in a fugue state, going through the motions of my research in the sterile, overlit Robertson Library, a place I'd always found soulless and unwelcoming. Every book I touched felt like a counterfeit. Every person I saw seemed diminished. As if a part of their world had been neatly excised and they were utterly, blissfully unaware of the hole it had left behind. That night, unable to sleep, I found myself drawn back to Albany Street. The rain had stopped, and the moon cast a weak, watery light on the silent building. The street was deserted. I stood across from it, wrapped in the cold and the quiet, and just watched. And that's when I heard it. It was faint, so faint I thought it was the rustling of leaves in the wind, or the distant sigh of the city. But I held my breath and listened, straining my ears. It was a rhythmic, whispering sound. A dry, crisp, papery shuffle, followed by a soft thump. Then the whisper and shuffle again. Over and over. Flick. Thump. Flick. Thump. It was the sound of a page being turned. And then another. And another. Coming from deep within the dark, silent, impossible building that everyone insisted was not, and had never been, a library. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 2, Growing Awareness and Isolation. The sound of turning pages became my new obsession. It was the only anchor in a world that had come unmoored. The initial shock curdled into a cold, hard certainty. I wasn't crazy. My memory wasn't faulty. The world was. My dissertation lay forgotten on my desk. My carefully constructed arguments about the evolution of Polynesian pronouns seemed laughably trivial compared to the immediate, pressing mystery of a concept being surgically removed from reality. I became a creature of the night, my waking hours inverted. By day, I slept fitfully, dreaming of vast, empty shelves and the smell of burning paper. By night, I kept vigil across from the municipal sorting facility. The sound was always there, a subtle, clandestine heartbeat in the deep quiet of the early morning hours. Flick. Thump. Sometimes it was a single, measured rhythm, like a solitary reader. Other nights, it was a chorus, a frantic, layered rustling that sounded like 1,000 books being consumed at once. No lights ever appeared in the windows. The metal door remained shut. The wrongness of it was a physical weight in my chest. My investigation began in earnest, a frantic scramble to find a single crack in the new, seamless reality. I spent days at the Hawken Collections, the city's archive, poring over old maps of Dunedin. I found maps from the 1920s, the 1950s, the 1980s. On every single one, the plot of land on Albany Street was marked with a stark, blocky rectangle labeled Municipal Services, or, on the older maps, simply left blank. There was no mention of Patterson, no library icon, no hint that it had ever been a place of public congregation. It was a paper trail leading to a perfect, retroactive void. I tried searching for the Patterson family, the supposed benefactors. The name was common enough. I found a few mentions of a Sir John Patterson, a 19th-century shipping magnate, but no connection to the university or any philanthropic gestures involving a library. It was another dead end that felt less like a natural conclusion and more like a carefully scrubbed history. The isolation was the worst part. It was a creeping frost, numbing my connections to the world. I would be having coffee with Chloe, and she'd complain about a missing footnote in her thesis. I'd want to scream, "You're worried about a footnote? They've taken a whole building. They've stolen it from our minds." But I'd just nod and murmur something sympathetic. Trying to explain was impossible. The words themselves seemed to fail. But what if there was a library there before? I asked Dr. Albright one afternoon, cornering him in his office. What if they tore it down and built this facility on the same spot? He peered at me over his spectacles, his expression one of deep concern. "Ilara, the building is a heritage site. It's been there since the 1890s. It's always been the building you see today. There's a plaque on the west wall, for heaven's sake." There wasn't a plaque. I had walked the perimeter a dozen times. But I went and looked anyway. And there it was. A new-looking bronze plaque, its lettering crisp and sharp, bolted securely to the stone. The Dunedin Municipal Sorting Facility, it read. EST 1892. This building has served the logistical and data management needs of the city for over a century. I felt a dizzying wave of vertigo. Had it been there yesterday? I couldn't be sure. The world was rewriting itself around me, patching the holes my memory insisted on finding. The nature of the conversations shifted. Before, people were confused. Now, they were beginning to treat me like a delicate, unstable object. Chloe started suggesting I see a university counselor. Dr. Albright sent me links to articles on academic burnout. They spoke to me in slow, simple sentences, as if the concept I was trying to express wasn't just forgotten, but was fundamentally incomprehensible, like a color I was inventing. Their pity was more maddening than their denial. I started a journal, an old, leather-bound notebook I bought from a dusty second-hand shop. I called it my Log of the Lost. On the first page, I wrote, "The Patterson Memorial Library existed. I remember it. I documented everything, the green armchair, the squeaky stair, the smell of the history stacks, the pattern of the tile in the foyer. I wrote down every conversation, every dead end, every new, unsettling detail. I described the sounds from the facility, trying to transcribe the different rhythms. The journal became my only confidant, the only place where my reality was validated. Flipping through its pages was the only thing that kept the screaming voice in my head, the one that whispered "You're losing your mind," at bay. My secondary mystery, the facility itself, became my primary focus. If the library was the victim, this place was the culprit. What did it sort? The official line, as parroted by Graham, was logistics and data. It was so perfectly, aggressively vague. A black box in the heart of the city. One afternoon, rummaging through a bin of cheap paperbacks at that same second-hand shop, my fingers brushed against something different. It was a slim volume of poetry by a local author, printed in the 1980s. The cover was creased, the pages yellowed. As I idly flipped through it, a faint mark inside the back cover caught my eye. It was a stamp, mostly faded, the ink blurred by time and moisture. But I could just make out a circular shape, and within it, the faint ghost of letters. P.A. E.R. M.E.M. L.I.B. My heart seized. I held it up to the light, my hands trembling. It was almost nothing. It could have been a smudge. It could have been my desperate imagination filling in the gaps. But for a single, breathtaking moment, I had proof. Tangible evidence. I bought the book for $1, clutching it like a holy relic. Back in my flat, I examined the stamp under a magnifying glass. The more I stared, the less certain I became. The letters seemed to shift, to dissolve back into ambiguous smudges. Was it really there? Or was I just imposing the pattern I so desperately wanted to see? The moment of triumph evaporated, leaving only a residue of paranoia. Was this a genuine clue, or just another trick my mind, or the world, was playing on me? I hid the book in a drawer, under my socks. It was too precious, and too tenuous, to show to anyone else. It was my secret, a fragile testament to a world that was gone. The isolation deepened. I stopped going to departmental seminars. I screened calls from my mother. The world of other people, with their solid, shared realities, felt alien and hostile. They were living in a simpler, cleaner version of the world, and I was the ghost haunting its edges, remembering the clutter that had been swept away. One evening, I had a conversation with Chloe that terrified me more than any dead end. We were talking about our childhoods. "Do you remember that cartoon?" she asked. "The one with the rabbit who was a detective. Wore a little trench coat." "Of course," I said. "Barnaby Rabbit." Chloe frowned. "Who?" "No, I'm thinking of, oh, what was his name? The Beagle. Detective Snoopy." "Snoopy was a beagle, but he wasn't a detective in a trench coat," I said, a cold dread prickling my skin. "That was a different thing entirely." "No, I'm sure of it," she said with a placid smile. "We used to watch it every Saturday. Detective Snoopy and the Mystery of the Missing Carrot Cake." She said it with such casual certainty. It wasn't just my library. It was smaller things, too. Fraying at the edges. Trivial, meaningless cultural touchstones being misremembered, their details swapped and overwritten. Barnaby Rabbit had been neatly sorted out of Chloe's memory, replaced by a bizarre hybrid. I mumbled an excuse and left, my head spinning. I ran back to my flat, to my log. I wrote it all down, my handwriting a frantic scrawl. Barnaby Rabbit. Chloe remembers Detective Snoopy. It wasn't just a missing library. It was a contagion. A quiet, creeping decay of shared knowledge. And the sorting facility on Albany Street stood at the center of it all, humming quietly in the dark, turning the pages of the world, one edit at a time. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. The Barnaby Rabbit incident was a turning point. My focus shifted from proving the past to understanding the present. It wasn't an event that had happened, it was a process that was ongoing. The sorting facility wasn't just a monument to a past crime, it was an active factory. But what was its raw material, and what was its product? My linguistic training, so useless until now, finally gave me a lens. Language isn't just a tool for communication, it's the scaffolding of reality. We perceive the world through the concepts our words create. If you remove the word, or corrupt the concept, you alter reality itself. What if the facility wasn't sorting data or recycling? What if it was sorting semantics? Pruning the language, and by extension, the collective consciousness. A kind of conceptual sanitation. The library, a repository of vast, complex, often contradictory information, would be a prime target. Too much redundancy. Too many narratives. It was inefficient. So it was streamlined. The concept of Patterson Library was excised, and the physical space it occupied was reassigned a simple, sterile function. The memories of it were tidied away. I started testing the theory. I began subtly dropping archaic or obscure words into conversation. Words like pulchritudinous or obstreperous. In the past, people might have asked for a definition. Now, they just looked blankly at me, a flicker of non-comprehension in their eyes, before their brains seemed to seamlessly substitute a more common word. "That's a very nice argument," Dr. Albright said, after I described a rival theory as jejune. The substitution was so smooth, so automatic, that it was horrifying. His mind hadn't registered an unknown word, it had simply failed to parse it. Replacing it with the closest available functional equivalent. The language was being simplified, its richness and specificity eroded, and people were adapting unconsciously. The anomaly began to bleed into my own work. One morning I opened my dissertation file and stared at a sentence I knew I had written. It read, "The primary signifier produces a stable, repeatable meaning." But I hadn't written stable. I had written monolithic. I was certain of it. I had spent an hour choosing that specific word. Stable was close, but it was weaker, less precise. It changed the entire nuance of the sentence. I scrolled through the document. Here and there, other words had been replaced. Diverse instead of heterogeneous. Connected instead of intertextual. My academic voice was being sanded down, its sharp edges smoothed into something more generic, more efficient. I felt a surge of intellectual terror. This was an attack on my very identity. I wasn't just a person, I was a linguist. My words were my tools, my life's work. And something was stealing them, not just from the world, but from my own saved documents, my own recorded thoughts. I knew I couldn't fight it alone. I needed an ally, someone whose mind was trained to see the patterns, someone who valued the archives of the world. I thought of the recluses, the eccentric academics who had been pushed to the fringes. My search led me to Rhys Davies, a retired cartographer who had been let go from the university years ago for what the departmental gossip called unscientific obsessions. He lived in a cluttered cottage out on the Otago Peninsula, surrounded by stacks of old maps and nautical charts. It took me 2 bus rides and a long walk up a muddy track to find him. He was a small, wiry man with eyes the color of the stormy sea, bright and restless. His house smelled of salt air, old paper, and wood smoke. To my astonishment, he seemed to understand immediately. I didn't even get halfway through my story about the library before he cut me off. "It left a hole, didn't it?" he said, his voice a low rasp. "A gap in the map. They're always tidying. Always smoothing the edges." Tears of relief pricked my eyes. I wasn't alone. "You see it too." "I don't see it," he corrected gently, gesturing for me to sit at a table covered in star charts. "I feel it. I map what is. And sometimes, to know what is, you have to be aware of what isn't. What unbecame. A street that used to be a thoroughfare is now a dead end on the new city plan. A coastal feature I charted for 30 years vanishes from the satellite photos. The world is a palimpsest, my dear. And there are erasures." He was a floodgate of validation. He spoke of conceptual sinkholes and semantic dead zones. He believed some force, he called it the editor, was simplifying the world for easier navigation, removing historical complexities and geographical redundancies. The library, he theorized, was a major reclassification. For a week, I felt a euphoric sense of hope. I visited Rhys every day. We compared notes. My log of the lost next to his annotated maps showing coastlines that no longer existed. He showed me old photographs of city squares with statues that were no longer there, the space now occupied by a bland, concrete planter. He was my fellow ghost, my partner in remembering. The revelation, the betrayal, came on a Thursday. I was telling him about the subtle word swapping in my thesis. "Ah, yes, the synonymic decay," he nodded, tracing a phantom coastline on an old map with his finger. "A messy business. It's hard to get the bindings right." "The bindings?" I asked. "When you excise a concept, you have to rebind the semantic connections around the void," he explained, his tone suddenly clinical, instructive. "Like careful surgery. If you just remove Patterson Library, you leave a hole in the memories of thousands of people. So you have to patch it. You assign the physical asset a new, low-impact designation. Sorting facility is a good one, very neutral. You gently nudge associated memories to a different location, like the Robertson. You degrade the specific name into background noise. It's a delicate art." I stared at him. The hope in my chest turning to ice. He wasn't describing it as a victim. He was describing it as a technician. You know how it works, I whispered. A thin, dry smile touched his lips. I've made my peace with the process. One might even say I consult. The editor is not malicious, Elara. It is logical. Reality is an unwieldy manuscript, full of redundant phrases and convoluted plots. It requires a firm hand. I help with the marginalia. I point out inconsistencies, frayed edges that need tidying. For instance, I flagged the Barnaby rabbit concept myself. Far too similar to several other archetypes. It was causing conceptual static. The Snoopy hybrid is much more streamlined. The floor seemed to drop away beneath me. This man wasn't my ally. He was a collaborator. A willing participant in the quiet destruction of the world I knew. He was a more advanced stage of the contagion, one that had not only accepted the process but had embraced its logic. You're helping it? I choked out, horrified. I'm helping reality remain coherent, he said, his bright eyes holding no malice, only a profound and terrifying certainty. There are things, concepts, that are too dangerous. Too complex. Memories that are destabilizing. The library was one. It held too many contradictions. Better to remove it, to smooth over the space it occupied. That's monstrous, I said, backing away towards the door. Is it? Or is it necessary? You cling to the clutter, my dear. To the messy, inefficient, beautiful junk of history. But the universe prefers a cleaner desk. He picked up a pen and made a tiny, precise mark on one of his maps. Don't fight it. You're a linguist. You, of all people, should appreciate the elegance of a perfectly edited sentence. I fled. I ran down the muddy track, my lungs burning, his calm, reasonable voice echoing in my head. He wasn't an ally, he was a gatekeeper, a gardener weeding the collective consciousness. And he had just told me, in no uncertain terms, that I was one of the weeds. That night, the sound from the facility changed. It wasn't just the turning of pages anymore. Beneath it, there was a new noise. A low, resonant, electrical hum. It was the sound of a machine spinning up, of a process escalating. It was no longer just erasing the past. It was actively building the future. And I was now on its list. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. Risa's betrayal shattered my last illusion of safety. I was no longer an observer of the anomaly, I was its designated target. The tidying was coming for me, for the very framework of my mind. My flat, once a sanctuary, now felt like a trap. I'd find my own neat handwriting in the log of the lost subtly changed, an adjective softened, a noun generalized. The contagion was seeping through the walls, through the very air, editing my reality as I slept. Desperation is a powerful catalyst. The passive fear that had defined my existence for weeks hardened into a sharp, brittle resolve. I couldn't run, because the contagion wasn't geographical. I couldn't fight Reese, because he was just a symptom. The only place to go was the source. The dark, silent heart of it all. The municipal sorting facility. 2 nights later, armed with a crowbar from my landlord's shed and a head full of terrified, academic curiosity, I went to break in. The moon was a sickle in the black sky. The street was utterly still. The low, processing hum from the building was a tangible vibration in the soles of my shoes. The metal door was impregnable, but I found my way in through a ground-floor window at the rear of the building, overlooking a dark alley. The old sash was stiff, but the wood around the lock was rotten. The crowbar splintered it with a sickening crack that sounded like a gunshot in the silence. I froze, waiting for alarms that never came. Of course there were no alarms. This place wasn't protecting itself from the world, it was processing it. A burglar was an irrelevant variable. I slipped inside, into a darkness that was absolute. My torch beam cut a nervous, trembling path through the gloom. I wasn't in a sorting office. There were no conveyor belts, no mail bins, no machinery I could recognize. I was standing in a library. But it was a library of nightmares. The shelves were there, stretching up into an impossible, vaulted darkness beyond the reach of my light. But they didn't hold books. They held concepts. I saw rows of what looked like glass slides, each containing a single, shimmering word. I walked closer to one. The word was melancholy. It pulsed with a soft, gray light. Next to it, a slide labeled Weltschmerz was dark, inert. Decommissioned. The sound of turning pages was all around me, a dry, constant whisper. I followed it down an aisle, my torch beam revealing the source. Along a vast wall, countless pages, not of paper, but of some shimmering, light-based medium, were being turned by unseen hands. I saw diagrams of historical events, their outcomes shifting and simplifying with each turn. A complex, multi-day battle would flicker, then resolve into a single, decisive heroic charge. A messy political scandal would be edited down to a simple case of one man's greed. It was the source code of history, being ruthlessly refactored. In the center of the cavernous room was what I can only describe as a furnace. But it burned with no heat, only a profound and utter coldness. A silent conveyor belt made of shadow carried discarded concepts into it. I saw the shimmering word Barnaby Rabbit slide past, followed by a complex diagram of a forgotten dialect from the north of England. They reached the edge and simply ceased. Erased with perfect, silent efficiency. There were no people here. No villains in chairs, no cabal of conspirators. The sorters were just as Reese had described, logical. They were patterns of light, geometric shapes that flickered in my peripheral vision, moving with immense, unhurried purpose. They were as indifferent to me as a bacteriologist is to the dust on his microscope. I was not an enemy. I was a contamination. A set of memories that had failed to update. My revelation was not one of horror, but of a vast, cosmic terror. This wasn't malice. It was housekeeping. Reality, it turned out, was an open-source project with a terrifyingly aggressive maintenance script. Humanity's collective consciousness was just one dataset among countless others, and it was being optimized. The richness I cherished was, to the editor, just noise. Then I saw it. On a kind of central altar, separate from the rest, was a new slide, glowing with a bright, active light. It was being prepared for sorting. My torch beam fell upon the word etched into it. My word. The concept that defined me. Linguistics. My breath caught in my throat. I saw the logic instantly. It was the study of the clutter. The analysis of the very mess the editor was trying to clean up. It was a meta-concept that was inherently inefficient, one that encouraged the preservation of redundancy. It had to go. And I saw the choice. A console flickered nearby, a series of glowing symbols I could not read. But I understood its function. It was a focal point. A place where one could, perhaps, interfere. I could try to fight it. Smash the console. Stop the process. But as I watched, I saw the feedback loop. When a concept was resisted, the system's logic intensified, its search for associated nodes becoming more aggressive. Resisting the removal of linguistics might trigger the removal of language, history, meaning, itself. Fighting the tide would only bring on the flood. But I couldn't just let it happen. I couldn't let myself be unmade. My life's passion, my entire identity, about to be dropped into a cold furnace. My mind, trained for years to find patterns, to understand systems, saw a third option. Not to fight the logic. Not to succumb to it. But to use it. I stepped towards the console. My hands hovered over the glowing symbols. I couldn't stop the process. But perhaps, Perhaps I could add a footnote. Suggest a different edit. My fingers trembled as I touched the surface. I didn't know the language of this system, but I knew the language of language. I thought about syntax, about substitution, about how to change the meaning of a sentence by swapping one word. I closed my eyes and focused, not on saving linguistics, but on defining it. I pushed my own understanding, my own memories, my own passion into the system. I framed it not as the study of clutter, but as the science of efficient categorization. As the grammar of reality itself. A way to understand the editor's own work. I was not defying the edit. I was offering a better one. A more elegant one. For a moment, the humming in the room intensified. The light on the linguistics slide pulsed violently. I felt a pressure in my head, a sense of a vast, alien intellect turning its attention to me, examining my offered definition. It felt like my soul was being proofread. Then, the humming subsided. The light on the slide stabilized, then dimmed, moving away from the furnace and sliding into a vast, dark archive shelf. It had not been destroyed. It had been refiled. I stumbled back, gasping, a profound exhaustion washing over me. I had survived. I had negotiated with the void. I walked out of the sorting facility as the first gray light of dawn touched the sky. The world looked the same, but I was different. I was no longer a ghost haunting a forgotten world. I was a part of the new one, a secret curator. I still live in Dunedin. I am finishing my dissertation, though its topic is now subtly different. It is a study of conceptual streamlining in normative semantics. Dr. Albright thinks it's brilliant. Groundbreaking. I'm an editor now. A ghost in the machine. Sometimes, late at night, I feel a nudge from the system. A prompt. A concept flagged for review. A historical figure deemed redundant. A species of flower too similar to another. And I make my case. I use my linguistic skills to argue for nuance, for memory, for a little bit of beautiful, inefficient clutter. I saved Sonder last month, but I had to sacrifice the memory of 3 minor 19th century poets to do it. It's a monstrous, silent, eternal negotiation. I walk past the municipal sorting facility often. I no longer hear the sound of turning pages from the outside. I don't need to. I can feel the quiet, constant hum of its work inside my own head. I am on the inside now, forever turning the pages myself. The quiet contagion, the pattern in the pavement. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. My world is built on grids. As a graphic designer in Sao Paulo, I spend 8 hours a day nudging pixels, aligning text boxes, and ensuring the clean, predictable lines of corporate branding remain unviolated. My life outside my cramped apartment in Vila Madalena is meant to be the antidote, the chaotic, vibrant mess of a city of 20 million souls. I thrive on the contrast. The grid and the chaos. The predictable and the wild. My street, Rua Inácio Pereira de Rocha, has always been a perfect example of the latter. The sidewalks, the famous Calcata Portuguesa, are a mosaic of black and white basalt tiles that are supposed to form a wave pattern, a river of stone flowing downhill. But here, they are a testament to decades of neglect and half-hearted repairs. They are a jumble of cracked tiles, missing pieces filled with concrete, and sections where the waves hiccup and dissolve into nonsense. I've walked this street 1,000 times. I know every treacherous crack, every raised edge that can catch a toe. It is reliably, comfortably, imperfect. Or it was. The first time I noticed it, I blamed the glare. It was a Tuesday, the air thick with the promise of afternoon rain, the sun a hazy, oppressive weight. I was walking home, my mind still buzzing with the feedback from a client who thought a logo needed to be more blue, but also warmer. My gaze was on the pavement, navigating the familiar obstacle course, when I paused. Something was off. It wasn't a sudden, jarring change. It was a feeling, a whisper of wrongness in the geometry. A section of tiles ahead, usually a chaotic mess, seemed to have a flow to it. A subtle curve, an alignment of previously jagged edges. I shook my head. Rubbing my eyes. Stress. Too much screen time. The brain seeks patterns where none exist. I kept walking, dismissing it as a visual artifact of a tired mind. But the next day, it was still there. And it was clearer. The curve was more defined. It wasn't just one section, it was a suggestion of a line, a faint arc that stretched for 20, maybe 30 meters. The tiles themselves hadn't been replaced, they were the same cracked, weathered stones. They had simply shifted. As if the ground beneath them had sighed and settled into a new, more elegant shape. I stopped and took out my phone, pretending to answer a text while I stared. It was like one of those optical illusions. If you looked directly at it, the pattern dissolved back into chaos. But in your periphery, from the corner of your eye, the arc was undeniable. It was the beginning of a spiral. A vast, lazy spiral, like a galaxy's arm, using my street as its canvas. Leo. You okay, man? I jumped. It was my brother, Matteo, coming out of the corner padaria, a warm paper bag in his hand. The smell of fresh pão de queijo momentarily scrubbed the weirdness from my brain. Yeah, fine, I said, trying to sound casual. Just, spacing out. Matteo is 2 years younger, a musician who manages to make a living playing bass in 3 different bands. He lives in a world of rhythm and sound, the polar opposite of my visual grid. He's looser, more attuned to the city's pulse. He clapped me on the shoulder, his grin easy and wide. Too much work. You look like you're trying to debug the sidewalk. Come on, I bought you a coffee. We sat at one of the small metal tables outside the bakery. The coffee was strong and sweet, the cheese bred a perfect, chewy comfort. I tried to forget what I'd seen. It was ridiculous. Pavement doesn't just rearrange itself. Hey, this is a weird question, I started, unable to help myself. Do the sidewalks on my street look different to you? Matteo laughed, a puff of sugar from his pastry dusting the table. Different how? There's still a mess. I almost broke my ankle last week by your building. Why? I don't know. It's like, they're lining up. In a pattern. He squinted, looking down the street. They look the same as always, Ermeo. A beautiful disaster. You're definitely working too hard. You're starting to project your pixel-perfect world onto the real one. He was probably right. It was the most logical explanation. My brain, so accustomed to imposing order, was now hallucinating it. And yet, the feeling lingered, a low-frequency hum of anxiety beneath the surface of my thoughts. The following weekend, I convinced Matteo to walk with me. My excuse was that I needed to go to a hardware store 10 blocks away. My real purpose was to force him to see it, to have my sanity validated. Okay, so look, I said as we started from my apartment building. Just, feel the walk. Don't look too hard. Just notice the flow of it. Matteo sighed, but he played along. We walked. I felt it, the gentle, almost imperceptible pull of the curve, guiding our steps. The spiral was more pronounced to me now, a clear, flowing line coiling through the urban chaos. I could see how it navigated around a gnarled tree root, how it incorporated a metal utility cover into its arc. It was elegant. It was impossible. So? I asked, my voice tight. Anything? Matteo stopped and looked back, then forward. He shuffled his feet. Leo, I swear to you, it's the same broken sidewalk it's always been. Look. He pointed to a jagged crack I knew well. Same crack. Same mismatched tile right there. I don't see any pattern. My heart sank. It was a cold, heavy feeling. He wasn't just disagreeing. he was looking at me with that gentle concern he'd had since our mother passed away last year. Is Leo coping, look? Okay, I said, my voice flat. Forget it. It's nothing. We kept walking, the rest of the way to the hardware store and back, in a strained silence. I felt foolish, and worse, I felt profoundly alone. The world had shifted under my feet, and I was the only one who could feel it. But then, as we approached the corner by my building again, something new happened. Mateo, who had been quiet, started to hum. It wasn't a song I recognized. It was a simple, non-melodic tune, just a few notes repeated in a strange, arpeggiated sequence. Up, up, down. Pause. Up, up, down. What's that you're humming? I asked. He blinked, as if waking up. Huh? Oh. I don't know. Just a thing that popped into my head. He stopped humming. But I had heard it. It was a quiet, insignificant thing, but it sent a fresh spike of ice through my veins. The rhythm of his humming, the rise and fall of the notes, it felt familiar. I looked down at the pavement, at the impossible spiral only I could see. The tune was the pattern. The notes followed the same gentle curve. Up, up toward the center, then a drop-off at the end of the phrase. A little spiral of sound. He said it just popped into his head. But it hadn't. It had started the moment we stepped back onto the most defined section of the pattern. He couldn't see the spiral, but somehow, he could hear it. And he didn't even know. That night, I couldn't work. I sat at my desk, the glow of the monitor illuminating my face, but my eyes were fixed on the window, on the street below. The streetlights cast long, yellow pools of light onto the sidewalk. And under that artificial glare, the pattern seemed to shimmer, more real than it was in daylight. I started a new file on my computer. Not a design project, but a journal. I named it the Ignacio Spiral. Entry 1, I'm not crazy. The pavement on my street is changing. It's forming a spiral. No one else can see it. But Mateo heard it. He hummed the pattern. He doesn't know. This is not a coincidence. Something is happening to my street. Or something is happening to me. I went to bed, but not to sleep. I listened to the sounds of Sao Paulo, the distant traffic, the whine of a lone motorcycle, the hum of my neighbor's ancient air conditioner. It was the city's usual symphony. But now I was listening for something else. A new note in the chord. A new rhythm in the chaos. The quiet, insidious melody of the pavement. Over the next few weeks, the mundane became a source of constant, low-grade dread. Every trip outside was an exercise in observation. The spiral was growing. Not quickly, but with a slow, geological certainty. It had crossed the intersection with Rua Wizard, the black and white tiles flowing in their impossible curve right across the asphalt. I saw drivers unconsciously swerve to follow the line. I saw a delivery guy on a scooter trace it perfectly before shaking his head and speeding off. They were all responding to it, a subtle choreography they weren't aware of. My work began to suffer. I'd stare at a client's perfectly grid layout and see the ghost of the spiral superimposed over it. Straight lines felt wrong, alien. The curve was the only thing that felt true. My boss, a stern woman named Isabella, called me into her office. "Leonardo," she said, her fingers steepled. "Your alignment is off. On the new campaign mock-ups. The kerning is sloppy. This isn't like you. Everything okay?" "Yes, fine. Sorry. Just been tired," I mumbled, the excuse tasting like ash. How could I explain that I was losing my faith in right angles? The isolation was the worst part. I stopped bringing it up with Mateo. The humming had become a regular feature of his visits. He'd walk into my apartment, humming the tune. He'd stand by the window looking down at the street, humming the tune. He now associated it with me, with my home. The pattern was branding him, marking him as part of its territory. One evening, I tried to record him. I left my phone's voice memo app running when he came over. We talked for an hour. He hummed the tune at least 5 times. After he left, I played back the recording, my heart pounding. There was only our conversation. The recording had picked up the television, the traffic outside, the clink of our coffee cups. But of the humming, there was nothing. Silence. It was as if the sound itself refused to be documented, as if it only existed in the moment, for those susceptible to it. I was living in 2 worlds. The first was the normal, bustling Sao Paulo everyone else inhabited. The second was a place of subtle warping. Of secret music and living geometry. The border between them was my own perception, and it was starting to feel terrifyingly fragile. I felt like a man standing on a shoreline, watching the tide come in, a tide that only I could see, knowing that eventually, it would wash over everything. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 2, growing awareness and isolation. The rationalizations crumbled first. It was no longer possible to blame stress or an overactive imagination. The spiral was a fact of my existence, as real as the oppressive humidity of a Sao Paulo summer. My life bifurcated into 2 modes, feigning normality for the outside world, and obsessive documentation in private. My notebook, the Ignacio spiral, became my only confidant. I filled its pages with sketches, mapping the spiral's slow, inexorable growth. It now encompassed nearly 10 square blocks, a vast, invisible whirl etched into the fabric of my neighborhood. I started using a color coding system. Red for the most defined, loudest parts of the curve. Blue for the newer, fainter extensions. I developed a new vocabulary. I wasn't just walking down the street, I was navigating the outer arm or approaching the core. The core was the new focus of my obsession. The spiral seemed to be coiling inward toward a specific point, a derelict, mid-century brutalist building that had been empty for as long as I could remember. It was a concrete monolith, stained with grime and neglect, its geometric facade a series of repeating, blocky balconies. It was ugly and imposing, an architectural dead tooth in the mouth of the neighborhood. The spiral wasn't just leading to it, it felt like it was emanating from it, like a ripple spreading from a stone dropped in a pond. My attempts to document the phenomenon grew more desperate. Since photographs and audio recordings failed, I turned to other methods. I tried sprinkling fine sand on a section of the sidewalk, hoping to see the grains align with the force I felt. I watched for hours, but the wind and the footsteps of oblivious pedestrians simply scattered it. I bought a cheap compass, thinking some magnetic anomaly might be at play. The needle quivered and spun uselessly near the core, but it was just as likely due to the mass of steel and wiring in the surrounding buildings. Every experiment was a failure, reinforcing the idea that the spiral existed in a state that was imperceptible to normal observation. It was a change in the rules, not in the objects. My isolation deepened, calcifying into a permanent state of being. Conversations became minefields. A casual, "How are you?" felt like a trap. Should I tell the truth? I'm fine, except for the fact that the city is rewriting its own geometry and singing a silent song that's infecting my brother's subconscious. I just smile and say, "Good, busy." I tried to find others. I spent late nights scouring the internet, diving into forums dedicated to urban exploration, Forteana, and conspiracy theories. I searched for terms like strange patterns, urban anomalies, psychogeography, humming sounds in cities. The results were a fire hose of noise, alien landing pads, ley lines, government mind control experiments, the usual digital detritus of paranoid minds. It was all too loud, too outlandish. What I was experiencing was quiet, insidious, and personal. Then I found a small, obscure blog. It was called Resonant Structures. The design was archaic, black background, green text. It hadn't been updated in 3 years. The author, a user named Eris, wrote about what he called ideomorphic geometries, patterns that emerge spontaneously in urban environments, not from physical construction, but from a kind of psychic pressure or memory bleed. Most of it was abstract, philosophical rambling, but one post made me freeze. Title: The Acoustic Signature of Place. Eris wrote, "We think of places as silent canvases on which we live. This is an error. A place with enough history, enough psychic weight, develops a voice. A resonant frequency. Most of the time, this is subliminal, a background hum we dismiss as tinnitus or the power grid. But sometimes, under specific pressures, a place can begin to sing a new song. This song can manifest visually, in recurring patterns of decay, in the flocking of birds, in the flow of traffic. It can rewrite the physical world in subtle ways that defy conventional measurement. To witness this is to be tuned to the new frequency. It is a lonely broadcast. A lonely broadcast." The phrase hit me with the force of a physical blow. That's what it felt like. I was a radio, the only one in the city tuned to this terrifying new station. I sent an email to the address listed on the blog, a desperate shot in the dark. I didn't expect a reply. The secondary mystery, the subplot that wove itself into my primary obsession, was Dona Elza. She was a fixture in the neighborhood, an elderly woman who must have been in her late 80s, always dressed in a faded floral dress and a cardigan, no matter the heat. Her oddity was her keys. She carried a massive ring of them, dozens of keys of all shapes and sizes, jangling from her fist. Her routine was unvarying. Every day, 3 times a day, she would walk a specific route. I realized with a sickening lurch that her route perfectly traced a section of the spiral's third arm. She would stop at certain points, a specific lamppost, a particular grade in the sidewalk, a brick wall, and she would try her keys. She'd meticulously select a key, try to fit it into a non-existent lock on the lamppost, jiggle it, then sigh and move on to the next spot. It was a behavioral loop, pointless and poignant. The other neighbors treated her as a harmless eccentric. "Poor thing, her mind is going," they'd say with pitying smiles. But I saw something else. I saw a person who was completely consumed by the contagion. The pattern had given her a task. While Matteo only hummed the tune, Dona Elza was actively trying to interact with the new reality. She was trying to unlock it. The sound of her keys became part of the spiral's soundscape for me, a dry, metallic counterpoint to Matteo's humming. One afternoon, I followed her, keeping a safe distance. She moved with a slow, shuffling certainty, her eyes fixed on points I couldn't see. She stopped at a wall, the brick stained with years of pollution. She chose a long, skeletal key and pressed its tip against a specific brick. For a moment, her entire body went rigid. I saw her knuckles turn white. She was listening, her head cocked. Then she relaxed, sighed her familiar, weary sigh, and moved on. She wasn't just trying locks. She was taking readings. She was a sensor, a human divining rod tracing the lines of a power I couldn't comprehend. My relationship with Matteo grew more strained. He could tell I was pulling away, lost in something I wouldn't explain. He started visiting more often, his concern manifesting as an almost suffocating brotherly affection. "Leo, let's go out," he'd say. "Let's go to a bar, see a show. You're becoming a ghost in your own apartment." "I'm just busy, Matteo. A lot of work." "No, it's not that," he said one evening, his voice serious. He was standing by my window, looking down at the street, unconsciously humming that 5-note tune. It was louder now, more confident. "You've been weird for months. You look at things, like they're about to break. Talk to me." I wanted to. I desperately wanted to unload the whole impossible story. But what would come out? The pavement is a spiral, and its song is inside your head, and an old woman is trying to unlock a lamppost. I would sound insane. He'd try to get me help. He would try to fix me. But I wasn't the one who was broken, the world was. I haven't been sleeping well, I lied. He looked at me, his eyes full of a love that felt like an anchor I was trying to cut loose. Is this about Mom? I seized the excuse. It was a cruel, easy out. Maybe. I don't know. I'm just in my head a lot. He accepted it, but the humming didn't stop. It was the soundtrack to his concern. The spiral was using my brother's love for me as a vector. The escalation came one rain-swept Thursday.